Hello and welcome to Salute Your Sports. Common Chef here with Tom Castleman. We have a great show for you today. We'll preview the NFL draft plus plenty of talk on the NBA playoffs as two of the biggest stars are already out. Boston sweeping the Nets, getting the brooms out, all Celtics. But some other series, Tom, are thankfully much tighter. We'll break those down and have plenty on a jam-packed and fun show. I'm fired up for it. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. We'll have a little bit of a show-wide salute to an all-time great athlete toward the tail end as well. But of course, as you mentioned, it's draft week. Get your best Kevin Costner impression on for the NFL draft. So I'm sure none of us want to put ourselves in this position, but imagine for a moment that you are the Jacksonville Jaguars, the number one overall pick in the draft. Where are you going? I mean, we can kind of go if you want to say, based on need, but if you're just looking at this draft as I'm taking the number one best player, regardless of position, who do you like?
So it's kind of funny because the Jaguars are in the same position again. They've been in this position many times over the years. So whatever they do, chances are they might mess it up. But for me, I actually look at two guys who are the two best players in the draft. One is going to be the name you've been hearing a lot. The other, I'm going to go with a little surprise pick for you. So the big one is Aiden Hutchinson. He was considered the number one overall pick, but right now there's a few other guys gaining traction. They could get an offensive line first. They could go with the Georgia defensive lineman as well. But Aiden Hutchinson was a Heisman finalist this last season, set the Michigan record for sacks, dominated against Ohio State. He is obviously an incredible talent and one to look out for. But the other best player in the draft, to me, and this is maybe not an absolute shock, but a little bit of a shock, because you look at where he's supposed to be picked, probably outside the top 10, according to most draft experts, early to mid first round. And that would be Jameson Williams out of Alabama. I know he's coming off an injury. I know he might miss some time, but you know how those doctors clean things up really good these days. I'm not too concerned about it because I think this guy is an elite level talent. They've clocked him at 4.39, running the 40, over 1,500 receiving yards for Alabama in the SEC, despite having another great receiver alongside him, despite having many targets, despite going up against the top players. I really like Williams. I think he's fast. He's physical. He's a fantastic receiver. And for me, the Jaguars got Trevor Lawrence, right? They got to build around him. As great as Hutchinson is, yes, Tom, I'm going to go around need, as you mentioned. I mean, the Jaguars have need on defense. They have needs all over the place. But if you draft your top quarterback, you got to take care of them. Sure, offensive line is one way to do that, but I actually think you got to get him a clear top dog receiver. We actually just saw the Bengals do this last season, and many they got criticized because they didn't get an O-line around Joe Burrow. Yeah, they took a lot of sacks, but guess what? They got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and they made the Super Bowl. So I actually think if you're the Jaguars, to me, Jameson Williams is the best player in this draft. He's the most talented player in this draft. But, if you're concerned about his injuries, I might go another receiver. There's a whole bunch of really good ones in this class, a whole bunch of really good ones out of Ohio State, actually. You can take either or Ohio State receiver if you want. But Williams, to me, is who I would pick first. I've seen him 12th. I've seen him 15th. So he's a first-round pick, but he's not considered, a top 5 pick. Maybe part of it is the injury. But, we saw Jalen Waddle coming off an injury from Alabama. And how did he turn out? Just fine. Over 1,000 receiving yards his rookie season, despite playing with a mediocre passing offense, a mediocre team. So I'm going Williams first. Otherwise, I would go Hutchinson would be my other thought. But those are the two best players, I think, in this draft. So I would go with one of those guys. I know they want to think about offensive line, but I don't know. Maybe I don't think the O-line is sexy or something, but from the little bit that I've read, I don't see an offensive lineman that is like a Jonathan Ogden in this draft. And if you don't have a Jonathan Ogden, get your quarterback his receiver, or get yourself a pass rusher who can, impact and hurt the quarterback as well.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it certainly would be. It's interesting also how like NFL teams look at positional value, for example, because I could have this wrong, but I believe the last receiver to go number one overall was Keyshawn Johnson. And certainly based on his career, merits that selection. And like you mentioned with Jalen Waddle, like obviously a fantastic player, and yet wasn't drafted until like midway through the first round, or no, he was like sixth overall or something like
He
that.
was
Drafted
early,
early.
but not
He was
first.
early, but not first overall. Um, See, it's just kind of like interesting how these drafts kind of pan out, especially in a year where, and we'll touch on this in the next segment, but there's not a true dominant great quarterback that everybody is going to love to take. There's not, a Trevor Lawrence, or even if you look at the other quarterbacks last year, whether it's, Trey Lance, whether it's Justin Fields, like there was a lot of guys that people liked in the draft last year. And this year it's the opposite, which means, if you're not going to be drafting the quarterback of the future, one option is to get him weapons. Another option, and I'm going to go against the grain with you on this
I
one,
know.
offensive line. I'm going
Sure.
O-line on this one. I really like Evan Neal from Alabama. He has a ton of talent. Isn't like a super like overly heavy guy. He's like really, really athletic. And for what I'm saying, just across the board is considered by a lot of scouts to be, day one starter, 10-year starter, a guy who's going to be in Pro Bowls, who's a guy who's going to be potentially an all pro tackle. And Jonathan Ogden's, those guys are rare to be sure, but if you're going to have success, I think, we can look at Joe Burrow, but is Joe Burrow going to be the rule or the exception to the rule as far as having success without, sufficient protection around him? I think, there's a couple different ways to build a team. If you don't have the quarterback, you have to either protect the quarterback or go after the quarterback. So I think Jacksonville would be well served to make sure that they block up for Trevor Lawrence, give him the most, time, the best protection to succeed in finding, what receivers that they have on the roster. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can go with best overall player in the draft. It means a lot of different things. I'm trying to think of like some other big names that might end up being pretty good, but to be perfectly honest, I don't know much better or worse than a lot of these draft experts, a lot of these scouts who, quite frankly, we're going to hear, about how great every single pick is. And in reality, about 50% of them are going to pan out as just like passable, serviceable NFL players, let alone what we're talking about is like the best overall player in the draft. Somebody's going to find, a George Kittle in the fifth round, for example, who's just going to blow the doors off, and wildly exceed expectations. But if we're focusing top end of the draft, I really like the top offensive tackle, Evan Neal, for me.
Yeah, and I do want to say one thing, just the way the game is changing. I know you're talking about like, is Joe Burrow going to be the exception to the rule? And it's going to be somewhere in the middle, of course.
Sure.
But I think we're seeing this with how Alabama, who sets the stage for college recruiting. I mean, like obviously they can't win every year, but Alabama is hands down the top program. They're either winning the championship or they're right there. They're in the playoff. And Alabama has changed the way they recruit. They used to be concerned with getting, and they're still wanting to get these guys, but the primary concern was getting the top level defensive players and the top running backs. Nowadays, Alabama wants the top quarterbacks and the top receivers.
Sure.
And quarterback has always been a focus in the NFL draft. I think receiver is going to become more so in the years to come, just because the game is changing. And I'd say this, I know offense typically on average is a little bit more of a popular pick anyways, but I think it's going to be significantly more because the way the game is done, with the way just the rules are done, it's all about offense in the league. So I actually don't mind your decision. I think Jacksonville would be all right going with an offensive lineman like Neal, who's going to bring a lot of stability. I would go offensive line, though. I wouldn't go defensive line. I wouldn't go defense. I would go either offensive line or receiver to improve your offense because you can't win without a great offense in the NFL. Obviously, you need to have both sides of the ball. Typically, if you're terrible on one side, you're not going to win. But if you look at just the last few years, the way the game's been trending, the top level teams are the top offenses or among the top offenses in the NFL. I think, was it 2018 maybe, or 2019? We had the 4 top scoring offenses were in the 2 conference championship games. And, you know, you look at the last couple years, I mean, the Chiefs among or the top offense in the league, they're always right there. The Rams actually were not top 10 in defense this last year, surprisingly enough. And they actually were better on offense. And I'll say this too, like, offensive line will always be important. But the way these quarterbacks are these days, it is just slightly less important because more of these quarterbacks can escape pressure. We have less of the Tom Brady, less of the Peyton Manning strict pocket passer. We've got a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who a couple years ago got to the Super Bowl with the banged up, not great offensive line. Joe Burrow took the most sacks in the NFL, got to the Super Bowl without a great offensive line. Now, those guys aren't necessarily going to be a Lamar Jackson or a Michael Vick, but they're both mobile to escape pressure. And Mahomes especially does it really well. Maybe Joe Burrow could do it even a little bit better, but some of these quarterbacks these days, they run to throw, not necessarily run to run. And that is something that is important. And you look at the top level quarterbacks in this draft, which we'll talk about in a little bit, like Malik Willis is very mobile. Kenny Pickett is pretty mobile, actually underrated as far as mobility. So this is how these quarterbacks are built these days. They're built a little bit more to run around than they used to be. But I definitely can see the Jaguars getting any one of those guys. But I do think that for them, the focus has to be offense, whether it's a receiver or whether it's an offensive lineman. They got to help out Trevor Lawrence. As great as Hutchinson is, I'm going offense if I'm the Jaguars.
Absolutely. Well, talking about the mobility of Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, that leads perfectly into the next topic of discussion is best quarterback in the class. And this is something that can take a couple of different ways. Could take it, who do you think is going to be the best for, helping their team out right away? Who's going to end up being the best quarterback overall in the class? I mean, there's a lot of different factors in play here and no consensus as to who the best quarterback is. This feels a lot like, I believe it was it 2013, where it was like EJ Manuel, Geno Smith.
None of those guys were
not a great quarterback class. I mean, we could also talk about the Christian Ponder, Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert draft class, all guys who were in the first round who haven't had especially fruitious NFL careers. So as we're kind of looking at the quarterbacks in this class here, who do you think are going to be, the best one, or maybe a couple different options for top QB?
Yeah, Tom, by the way, I know you listed off earlier, like all those top end talented quarterbacks. Trey Lance, you listed, Justin Fields. I don't think you even mentioned Zach Wilson, but Trevor Lawrence, he was a high pick. You mentioned him, but Mac Jones. But it's funny because last year was a highly touted class with all these quarterbacks going in the top 15. And certainly there's plenty of time for them to turn it around. And certainly a lot of them went into bad situations. But you look at that quarterback class as a whole, was pretty disappointing rookie seasons. I mean, again, I know Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence don't have a lot to work with. I know that. But if you look at the numbers they put up, those two guys were more talented to put up the numbers that they did. Even Zach Wilson. Like, Zach Wilson actually played worse than the backups who went in for him with the Jets. Lance didn't get much time to play. It's too early to grade him. But really, Mac Jones was the only solid one, and I still wouldn't say that he necessarily lit up the NFL or anything.
Sure.
And he was drafted later than those guys, so he had less expectations. So it's funny how that works out. You're talking about bad years where there's a lot of no expectations on quarterbacks. There was a lot of expectations last year, and at least up to this point, that quarterback didn't live up to the hype. We'll see with this class. I actually think there's not probably going to be a Hall of Famer in this class, but I think Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett are both a little bit better than they're given credit for. Those are the top two quarterbacks. If you listen to the gradings, it's crazy because if you look at mock drafts, there's some mock drafts that have one or both in the top 10. There's some that have neither in the top 20. So it'll be interesting because there's only like a handful of teams that might go quarterback, like Falcons, Panthers. They might go quarterback, they might not. Then, like, you hear the Steelers is the first team that is like for sure going to go quarterback, supposedly, as we say, and they don't pick until the 20s. So it is really interesting to see who's going to go first. But as far as breaking down these top two players, I mean, it's a pretty tough call. I think statistically, Kenny Pickett was definitely the better college player. More than 4,000 pass yards last year, 42 pass touchdowns. I think he's the more safe pick as far as like less likely to be a bust. But I think in the modern day NFL, you want to win a championship. And to win a championship, you need to have an incredible team to not win with a great quarterback. Pretty much, you need a great quarterback. Gone are the days of Trent Dilfer. You look at the last winning quarterbacks, you know, Stafford, Brady, Mahomes. I mean, even the guys making the Super Bowl, like with the exception of maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, pretty much all these teams that have been at the Super Bowl level or near it have been elite level quarterbacks, and he's very underrated. So I actually think you got to go with Malik Willis. You got to go big or go home. Malik Willis is a great kid. I love that video of him helping out the homeless person on the street. And he's simply more athletic than Pickett, and he's got a stronger arm. Pickett doesn't necessarily have the strongest arm, not that you necessarily need it with Drew Brees, but Willis is clearly a better athlete, clearly a stronger arm. Obviously an Auburn recruit. I know he's coming out of Liberty, but that's because for some reason Auburn devalued him, just like Ohio State devalued Joe Burrow. We know that happens. But one name I would say that you don't want to sleep on that I think could also be an NFL starting quarterback that won't go in the first round. And, you know, he may not be a great player, but I think he can be a starter. That is UNC Sam Howell. Some places have him third, some have him fourth, some have him fifth or sixth. But to me, he's a clear number 3 and not too far behind the other two. Size and height is another question mark with him. But I think he throws a beautiful ball. I think he had a bad season last year because he lost pretty much like everyone he had, you know, the previous year, his main targets. So I'll say Willis number 1, Pickett number 2, slightly behind him, and Howell slightly behind him at number 3. I'm not saying that any of these guys are great players, but I think all 3 are a little bit better than maybe they're given credit for. I think last year's draft class got a little overhyped. I think this one is getting a little underhyped.
Yeah, and that's the thing to keep in mind as we're like leading up to the draft and with all the draft coverage is that pretty much no matter where you go, whether it's McShay, whether it's Kiper, whether it's, you know, Matt Miller, whether it's, you know, any number of draft reporters, basically mock drafters, they go basically entirely off of unnamed sources because teams need to protect who they're drafting, which means you can have people saying whatever they want to say about a player, maybe something along the lines of, oh, in the case of Matt Corral, oh, he's a little, you know, there's some off-field things that, you know, we're concerned about, that everyone's concerned about, because that's the sort of thing that like depresses a player's value so that the team that might want him can get him, sort of thing.
Sure.
So I think there definitely is some of that where there's a little bit talking, you know, let's talk the quarterbacks down a little bit, because then those teams sitting in like the teens, early 20s might have a better chance of getting somebody for the future. If you look at a team like, say, you know, Tampa, Tennessee, teams that might want to get somebody for the future, that's the spot to try to grab them. As far as my favorite, I'm right alongside you, Malik Willis. You go for the high upside. He's definitely the type of guy that probably needs to sit for a year, probably needs to learn, because the things that I read about are like he has great tools. It's just putting everything together, and like going from Liberty to the NFL is a big jump. Going from anywhere, except maybe like Alabama, Ohio State, going from any college to the NFL is a massive jump. It's even bigger if you're going Liberty to NFL. So I think that, you know, we're not going to see a lot of early returns from Malik Willis this year, but just like arm talent and legs, great option. I also like Desmond Ridder out of Cincinnati. I think he's going to be, you know, kind of similar to Sam Howell, where it's like could be a decent quarterback, could be starting for you at some point. Don't know if he's going to knock your socks off, so to speak, but he's somebody that I'd be intrigued to see in the NFL as well. And then, yeah, like with Sam Howell, is it going to be, once he's surrounded with good talent again, not too terribly dissimilar from Mac Jones, for example? Is he going to return to that level of quarterbacking where a lot of people thought he was the best quarterback in this class? Or is there some concern that, like, if he doesn't have the perfect set of weapons around him, can he succeed at the NFL level? So I think he's going to be fascinating to watch as well. So basically, it's kind of interesting being in a year where we don't have, like you were saying, the super hyped up draft class where, you know, the top 5 like quarterbacks are going in the very first half of the first round. It's going to be interesting to see, based on fit, who kind of gets picked and chosen where, and the situations they end up in order to perhaps have a more unconventional route to success, where we're going to see a lot of guys sitting for a year or two. I'm not super high on Kenny Pickett, just because I think he pretty much is what he's going to be from everything that I'm reading, which is serviceable. But is that what you really want if you're picking, say, 6 overall at Carolina? So, like Malik Willis a lot. A couple other intriguing options, but I think he's going to be best out of the class.
Yeah, a couple real final things to tie it in on this quarterback stuff before we get to steal of the draft. And this kind of leads into the steal of the draft, so this is a good lead in. I want to make this absolutely clear. NFL, you mentioned your comment about Willis, Liberty to the NFL. I'd actually argue specifically for a quarterback, it actually might be even tougher Alabama to the NFL, because you look at a guy like Matt Leinart, for example, who was an all-time great college quarterback, at least statistically and wins-wise. Well, he's used to throwing to wide-open receivers left and right. So for some of those quarterbacks, like a Malik Willis, for example, maybe you haven't thrown to wide-open guys as much, so it can sometimes be a shock for you. Tim Tebow is another example. Tim Tebow was a fantastic college quarterback. You look at his college passing numbers; they're actually pretty good. It's just that it's just a different set of circumstances. The game is faster, and you're having to not have a wide open guy. Because I mean, if you're a quarterback at Alabama, especially these days, I mean, you saw it with Tua. I think Tua can definitely do better in the NFL than he's doing. But Tua and Mac Jones, I mean, it was quite frankly easy. You look at the receivers those guys have played with. You dial up a play and you say, like, you've got option 1, pretty good chance he's open. If he's not, look quickly at option 2, then he'll be open. You don't even have to have a third read if you're playing at Alabama. So that's something that is very, very interesting. And that's why you look at that last class, like, why was it so hyped up? I mean, you look at the numbers that Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields put up. They were playing with incredible talent, like Zach Wilson playing in a weaker conference, Mac Jones playing with incredible talent, Trey Lance playing at a weaker division level. So those guys simply didn't have the ability to go up against those type of guys. I'd argue that maybe Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis have actually had a little bit more of a chance to go up against that type of stuff. But also, if you watched the ACC defenses last year, you saw there wasn't very much defense played in that conference as far as Kenny Pickett goes. So we'll see. But I think the draft experts, like, football is a very different sport. I would argue that the speed of the college and NFL game is probably bigger than any sport. Like NBA, NBA, the speed is much bigger in the end. Obviously, any professional level, it's much harder. The players are much better. But when you watch a college basketball player, you can tell, like, can he shoot? Like, his shooting's not going to automatically get worse in the NBA. Like, the speed of the game might be harder, but if he can shoot in college, chances are he can shoot in the NBA. It's just completely different for some of these other guys, and it's very hard to judge guys. And these experts, I mean, like, Todd McShay, you may remember this, Tom, was huge on Blaine Gabbert coming out of Mizzou. We went to Mizzou. We could tell you that Blaine Gabbert, whenever he got pressured, did not do well at Mizzou. Happy feet. That doesn't, I mean, sorority girls at the football games were like, this guy's terrible. So, I mean, like, in many ways, the Mizzou sorority girls knew more about Blaine Gabbert's happy feet than Todd McShay might from watching those games where he did. Like, when Gabbert did get time to throw, yeah, he was great. He had good receivers. He had a good arm. But when he doesn't have time to throw, he was terrible. And maybe McShay didn't watch enough of those games because Todd McShay was very high on Blaine Gabbert. And then you get out there on pro day and, you run a fast 40, you jump high, you throw the ball far, and all of a sudden Blaine Gabbert is the first round pick. It's like mind-boggling to me how Blaine Gabbert was a first round pick. Like, if you can't play with pressure in your face, like, you shouldn't be an NFL starting quarterback, which is, we've seen Blaine Gabbert like a backup. He's a backup. He's not a starter in the league. If that's your starter, you're not a winning team. So just something to think about. Like, as you listen to these experts, it truly is very hard to predict how guys will be at the next level. And one other thing to think about, this is a very highly touted receiving class. Let's see which one of the receivers pan out and which don't, because we certainly have a lot of speed, but speed doesn't always translate to NFL greatness. I mean, Jerry Rice is the GOAT, and he is far from one of the fastest of all time when it comes to receivers.
Absolutely. That's going to be something interesting to see as well, because the thing I've heard about the receivers in this draft is, relatively speaking, talent is pretty much even across the board. It's more, what kind of receiver do you need? Do you need a Drake London who's, big 6'4" body, can go up and get the football? Or do you need somebody like a Chris Olave to take the top off the defense? So I think that dovetails nicely into at least one of my sleeper picks, which is the next topic that we have on tap. So as far as like sleepers, underrated players that you have in mind, and I'm going to take this like more of, top end talent that's going to go a little bit later for one reason or another. I have a feeling that we're going to be on the same page for a fellow alum of ours. So, Common, I'll let you get started with some of your favorite sleepers for the draft.
Are you talking about Tyler Beatty?
I am.
Oh,
Do you have him as a sleeper?
I didn't have Tyler Beatty written down, but I love Tyler Beatty. By the way, I covered Mizzou sports. I covered Tyler Beatty his first couple of years at Mizzou before he was a megastar. And then he took off as soon as I left. So maybe I was a positive charm for Tyler Beatty. But I think that's a really good sleeper, Tom, because in the NFL, you need guys who can also catch the ball out of the backfield. And he's going to be a really good player. But I don't have Tyler Beatty written down. I went with sort of like one top-end talent that will be higher, that is better than he will be drafted. And I went with one guy that will be drafted really late. That should be drafted much earlier, if even drafted at all. So my two steals of the draft, I completely agree with Tyler Beatty, by the way. An excellent kid, too. His mom, by the way, likes and retweets everything about him on Twitter. So if you tweet about Tyler Beatty, as I used to do as a Mizzou sports reporter, his mom will give you a like or a retweet or a mention. So
there you go.
She searches his name on Twitter all the time. So I look for a lot of her stuff on draft day. But my first sleeper is Jameson Williams. I just mentioned him off the top. More than 1,500 receiving yards at Alabama, despite having, John Mechie there to steal some of his spotlight. He could have had more yards, quite frankly, and he was still fifth in the nation. He had a lot of good numbers. He was really fast. He's very athletic. I know he's coming off, I think, an ACL injury. I think his injury is, but I think he's going to be just fine. Jalen Waddle recovered fine off that, and he's a guy that's like 10 to 15-ish range, according to mock drafts. I think he's the best player in the draft. I really do. So Jameson Williams, I think, is going to be a Hall of Fame receiver. I think he's that talented. I think he's that good. And I think the success of the Alabama receivers in recent years bodes well for him. Clearly, Nick Saban knows how to pick these guys out of high school, and Jameson Williams is one of the best. So he's my sleeper as far as like top-end talent that will go in the first round, but should go higher. As far as low-end talent, I've got one, and you know me, Tom, I'm a fan of stats. Mm-hmm. I try not to get too caught up in 40 times, although Williams does scream at you. But I'm going to give you Western Kentucky's Jerreth Sterns. How about this, Tom? Led college football in receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and catches. Third player ever in college history to get the Triple Crown. He had 14 games, 150 catches, 1,902 receiving yards, and 17 receiving touchdowns. The knock on him, he is a small guy. He is tiny. He's very small. He's not big enough to play in the NFL. He's not fast enough to play in the NFL. He's not strong enough to play in the NFL. You know, Michigan State, Big Ten power school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really good defense in the Big Ten. Ask Michigan State what it was like shutting this guy down. 17 catches, 186 yards against Michigan State this last season. I know. He played at Western Kentucky. They were the modern-day Texas Tech. They were all about air raid. They're all about passing the ball. But my goodness, you get nearly 2,000 receiving yards in 14 games. Some of those stats don't lie. He had some of his best games against some of the better teams he played, like that Michigan State game that I mentioned. Like, is he going to be a Hall of Famer? You know, probably not. But he's a guy that you can get very late in this draft. I think he's going to be a great slot receiver. And I think sometimes, as you'll see with Tyler Beatty, having a little guy, like, you don't want to get too many little guys, but if you have a little guy, he can be a little bit harder to tackle sometimes. You're not used to that low gravity angle of tackles, and he's an excellent route runner. So that is something that gets devalued a lot when looking at recruits. So I think he's going to be a really, really good player. I look for him to be, you know, a number 2 receiver in the NFL, a number 3 receiver, depending on the team. Really, really solid slot receiver, a guy that's not going to get a first or second round look, third, fourth, fifth, maybe not even 6th or 7th, just because he's too small, but he'll be a good player.
Absolutely. So I know we talked a little bit about Tyler Beatty, but as far as a couple other steals, I mean, for me, he's going to be underdrafted pretty much only because of the position he plays, and that's running back. I'm going with Iowa State's Breece Hall. He's pretty much just like a complete all-around running back who's going to come in and have a big impact on your team from day one. Just a really, really physical, solid runner that I enjoy. So he's probably going to be like a second-round pick type of player, probably going to go to a team, you know, maybe like a Buffalo, for example, because they could use a running back. And I think like he's going to be a steal simply because a lot of running backs are going to be steals. A lot of running backs are going to be players that get picked in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds that can come in and have an impact because, unfortunately, the position's relatively fungible. You know, one running back is as good as another type of thing. So I think he's going to be a steal. And then out of Alabama, I think John Mechie is going to be a steal. I mean, consider what we were saying about, you know, Williams and Mechie throughout the last, you know, season. Mechie suffers an injury, and all of a sudden he's expected to be somewhere like in round 2, maybe round 3 type of thing. He should be going much, much higher because he would if he were healthy. And I know that that's a big caveat. But as you mentioned, you know, receivers and just athletes in general are able to come back from injuries that much quicker, that much better. Mechie's known to be a really, really tight route runner, really proficient and efficient in his route tree. And, you know, that's going to be significant. You know, that's what Devontae Smith uses to succeed, both at the collegiate and professional level. So I look for Mechie to be a steal as well. I don't know enough to get like super deep cut, you know, late round or undrafted. I suppose Tyler Beatty technically is going to be like a late round pick because, you know, he's a running back. He's coming out of Mizzou, which quite frankly doesn't have a great football program. So that's kind of a question about pedigree on his end. But those are a couple of sleepers that I really like for this draft.
Well, Tyler Beatty was the top running back in the SEC this last season. So you can talk about Mizzou's program all you want, but he was going up against SEC level guys, and
sure.
he was dominating them. So Tyler Beatty should be. And I have one point on that, the running backs point. Like, I think we've taken it just a little bit too far with these running backs. It's like, yes, certain guys can be interchangeable if we're talking about good running backs. But whenever you have a great running back, it is worth drafting him.
Absolutely.
And I look at the Steelers with Najee Harris this last season. This is who I think I was talking about him for sure. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't. But he was a late first round pick, and it was obvious that Najee was going to be a great player, and he was already a top 5 running back in the league as a rookie. And if you're looking at the top 5 players out of the draft, I don't care what position he plays. I don't think that the Steelers could have gotten anyone like that good. So if there's a great running back, I have no problem with you drafting that running back in the top 10. I'm not necessarily seeing one this specific draft, but I don't necessarily like this idea of let's not draft the running back early. I just I get it to an extent, but I think a lot of what has to be done with the draft is you got to get yourself the best players, period. And part of that too is like we don't run the ball as much these days. That's why I'm saying receivers will take more of a prominent role because the NFL is a passing league. And this is kind of an NBA comparison, but this is something that I was talking about with one of my coworkers on our memorabilia show online. Like, think about the NBA. The NBA is all about the 3-point shot, right? That's what the NBA is about. Take a look at the last 3 MVPs. We had Giannis win 2 MVPs. We had Jokic win 1 MVP. Jokic might win his second, and if it's not him, it's going to be Embiid or Giannis. So we would have 4 straight MVPs of guys who are not necessarily great 3-point shooters. Obviously, Embiid and Jokic can step out and hit the 3. That's not their game, though. And you look at the NBA Finals champions, the Bucks. Giannis, the best player, not his game. LeBron is respectable at threes, but he's not necessarily an amazing 3-point shooter. And Davis was the Lakers' second best shooter. Again, a guy who can hit a 3, but not a great 3-point shooter. So, the last few NBA champions, like it's been guys that are bigger, more athletic, more skilled. And I think you got to apply some of that to the NFL as well. Because if you've got yourself, a Jim Brown, Barry Sanders, LaDainian Tomlinson, Marshall Faulk type talent at running back, you should not hesitate to draft him, even if it's first overall.
Absolutely. That's something that, it comes down to like the mathematizing of the game as far as like, okay, where do we get the most value from a pick? And then it's not necessarily value, like get best player available. Not a lot of teams truly follow that because they factor need into that and end up costing themselves a little bit, missing out on some talent that could help the team, because that's the thing about the NFL. Like, injuries happen at every position. I know running back is super prevalent, but injuries happen everywhere. So you never really truly are fully set at a position ever as an NFL team. So it'll be interesting to see how the draft goes on starting Thursday, I believe it is. Thursday. Is the first round. Second and third rounds on Friday, and then the rest of the draft takes place on Saturday. So we'll have, perhaps some interesting things to talk about. There's already been some, pre-draft trades in terms of New Orleans picking up an additional first-round pick. And, the wild thing is going to be with a bunch of teams that have multiple picks. The Giants have a couple of top 10 picks. The Jets have a couple of top 10 picks. There's going to be a ton of movement. So if anything super interesting happens, we'll definitely be talking about it next week, as well as the NBA playoffs as we march further and further along there. The biggest story, I mean, we talked about, offhand, just, we've jinxed the Nets and everything. But quite frankly, the Nets have done it to themselves. And I was just unwilling to believe everything that my eyes were telling me when looking at this team. But what do you have as kind of like some of the top reasons as to why Brooklyn is sitting at home as opposed to hoisting the O'Brien trophy like we kind of thought they would later on in the summer?
Yeah, by the way, they were the most popular pick before the season started to win the championship. That is obviously by general managers in the NBA, and that is obviously before James Harden was let go. Real quickly about the NFL, one more thing. Our Bears don't have a first-round pick, so that hurts. But as far as the Nets, here's some irony as far as what went wrong this specific series. Because I said it, like, we picked the Nets to win this series, but I said a Celtics series win would not surprise me. Just the fact that it was a sweep was an absolute shocker. And it's crazy because the Nets were winning game 1. They lose on a 1-point buzzer beater. And then they were up like, what was it, 17 points in game 2. Like, they should have been up 2-0 heading home. Instead, they get swept. They're down 2-0 and losing 4 games. But the irony of what went wrong, and we'll get into what went wrong but with the team as a whole, but this specific series, the question mark with the Nets was, would they get enough from their third, fourth, fifth, sixth players? Tom, their third, fourth, fifth, sixth players were great in this series. Their scores, third from eighth, shot better than 40%, or better than 50%, excuse me. Everyone third through eighth shot better than 50% from the floor. Every single player. They played 9 guys in the series. Number 3 through 8 all shot better than 50%. They shot as a team better than 50%. They shot better than 40% from 3. Why did they lose? Because of turnovers, lack of defense, but in particularly their superstar players playing terribly, in particularly Kevin Durant. That was the reason they should win this series. Kevin Durant had one of the all-time most disappointing series. And honestly, when I think of worst series by superstar players, the 2011 finals by LeBron James, I know I love LeBron. That was his one bad playoff series, is the first that comes to mind. The second that will always come to mind to me will be Kevin Durant in round 1. It's embarrassing for Durant. I know he's coming off an injury. I don't care. 38.6% from the floor, 33% from 3, averaged 5 turnovers a game in this series. The Nets got swept because Durant was terrible. He was terrible. He showed up for 1 half in game 4. 1 half. He showed up the first half in game 4. The rest of the game, he did absolutely nothing. He was 0 for 10, I think. What game was it? Game 3 or game 2 in the second half? One of those games. And then Kyrie Irving was great in game 1, terrible the rest of the series. Kyrie himself shot 44%, got 21 a game, but if you take out game 1 where he couldn't miss anything, those numbers were much worse the other 3 games. So they got 1 great game from Kyrie, and they got 1 great half from Durant. The irony about the Nets, it was like, what do they have around these guys? The problem was that the superstars didn't show up. And that is a huge problem. And part of that is, yes, Kyrie cost them. He missed all those games this season. They couldn't get their chemistry down. You know, part of it is Steve Nash the right coach? Maybe not. I mean, you look at Nash, Durant, Irving, not necessarily guys you think of as leaders. I know there's the distractions of James Harden. There's the whole thing of Ben Simmons. Like, the Ben Simmons thing didn't even have to be brought up. And part of it was the media. Part of it was the fans. But if I'm the Nets, like, you don't even talk about Ben Simmons. Like he hasn't even played a game in who knows how long. I don't even think he's going to be the same player ever again. But it was disastrous for the Nets. And it's different when KD is playing with Stephen Curry, who's clearly a leader on the court. It's different when Kyrie's playing with LeBron James. But you look at their roster, they don't have that dude who's going to be a leadership. Kevin Durant should spend this time focusing on how to make his teammates better than instead of tweeting at Charles Barkley or Instagramming whatever he's doing about how Charles Barkley didn't win a ring, even though Charles Barkley, when he was playing with Hakeem Olajuwon, guess what? Olajuwon and Drexler were washed up at the time. And when he was playing with, was it Moses Malone or whoever he was playing with the Sixers early on in his career, they were washed up then. Katie, do better, man. Do better, because Kevin Durant, you had one of the all-time disappointing series. And when I think of guys in professional sports history who are the least built to be a leader, those intangible qualities, Kevin Durant is the first man I think of. He's immature. Kyrie Irving is even more immature. You know, those 2 guys, like, if that's your franchise, I'm sorry. You're building your franchise around 2 dudes that do not know how to lead a squad, 2 dudes that are distractions, 2 dudes that, quite frankly, you can't rely on. Like, sometimes there's some things that matter more than talent, and the Nets don't have the intangibles. I mean, I don't know. This roster construction is shocking to me because, like, they thought that they could put together a bunch of really good players, but they never considered fit. Like they're both perimeter players. They're taking away from each other. Like neither of them are leaders. Like I don't know. It's just a mess. But that's not a good basketball team. They can win games once in a while because of individual greatness. But when you go up against an individually great team like the Nets are defensively, or not the Nets, the Celtics, excuse me, you're in trouble. And the Nets are, quite frankly, they're a joke, man. They are a joke.
Yeah, they're going to get their ridicule, and justly so. I mean, it's there's a lot of blame to go all around as far as this team goes. I mean, you have a coach who didn't really have much, if any, coaching experience, and Steve Nash put at the helm of this organization. And you had a front office that I don't know if they just thought they were playing like 2K or something like that, but they said,
did.
hey, we're going to trade a bunch of our depth, a bunch of our talented players for James Harden when you have your other two stars, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, coming off of injuries. And what we're seeing is that the big three model only works when all three of your stars are healthy. That's how it worked in Miami. I mean, Miami ran into, like you said, the bad series with LeBron, and then just, I guess even like
Wade got hurt. Wade got hurt the last couple years.
That's what I was trying to remember, is like when Dwayne Wade started having the knee issues, and that's when they lost that series to the Spurs. So it's if you're going to go for the big three model, you have to have all three stars pretty much operating at full strength, at full health. And if not, you're going to find yourself relying on other guys. That's why we saw in LA this year, it was such a dumpster fire, is because you're missing LeBron James for a chunk of the season. You're missing Anthony Davis for a chunk of the season. And quite frankly, Russell Westbrook is not the same level of star that he used to be. He's a lot of name recognition, but he's not as good as he once was. And then, we saw something similar in Brooklyn, where Kyrie makes the choice to not be around the team and have the audacity then to say, like, oh, Boston has the advantage of gelling since December. And it's like, you could have had that too.
Your fault, bro.
You could have made that decision too. And like, after you get swept is not perhaps the best time for that sort of retrospection. So it just like all comes down to fit. And the Nets just didn't have it this year. I think that they still have the talent. I still think that they can, go out and perhaps win a title next year. I don't put that out of the question, especially when you consider, there are going to be, big men guys that can play center that are going to join for a veteran minimum type of thing. Kyrie is ostensibly going to be playing all of next year. You're going to have Kevin Durant actually healthy, next year, heading into the season at the very least. Of course, things can happen over the course of a year, but the Nets should be in a better position next year to where maybe they're hosting a playoff series instead of having to fight through the play-ins to get into the playoffs and then fight in the first round against a Boston Celtics team that, quite frankly, is playing out of its mind right now. And that's where we should be giving more of the credit. I know we're talking about, how the Nets blew it, but, hats off to the Celtics and what they've done. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, fantastic stars. And then Marcus Smart, first guard winning defensive player of the year. The perimeter defense that he brings, I mean, that's more important than ever in an NBA that doesn't have or doesn't accentuate the back to the basket, post up, Kevin Durant or Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, Shaquille O'Neal type player. That doesn't really exist all that much in the NBA. It's all about perimeter D, and Marcus Smart can lock up, the opposing team's best player like nobody's business and really make them work for their shots. So, great job by Ime Udoka, the coach for the Celtics, and just the job that they've done in this postseason. And they're going to be even scarier getting Robert Williams, their starting center back, because for a time, both he and Marcus Smart were kind of like going to split the vote for Defensive Player of the Year. Then, of course, he has that knee injury and isn't playing toward the end, which allows Smart to go in and win that. Boston is going to be super duper scary for a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference, to be sure.
And you're talking about Marcus Smart. What about Jason Tatum? I don't know if you saw the stats, and I just saw this scrolling through the internet. I actually should have written it down, but Jason Tatum guarding Kevin Durant one-on-one this series, was phenomenal. Kevin Durant couldn't do anything against Jason Tatum. So it's like that entire team plays defense. That's why they are the number one defense in the NBA. And
Mm-hmm.
I know we're in the offense beats defense era, and that is true. But the same way we were talking about earlier, how like it's a 3-point era, but if you're really good at something, you can still win. Hence how we saw Giannis and LeBron winning rings despite being, outside 3-point shooters. So Boston is winning with its defense, and Jason Tatum's another guy that plays phenomenal defense. We can talk about Marcus Smart, but that's actually Jason Tatum's ascension to a next level player is can he play the defense he played against Durant? And I mean, if he can play against Durant that way, he can play against anybody. So Boston is a great team. I mean, that Boston-Milwaukee series is going to be off the rails. So we'll tease that. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But Tom, I do want to ask you about another series. Like we're talking about teams choking. No team ever has been up 3-0 in an NBA series. I know we've seen the 3-1 comeback. I know we had the Warriors do it against the Thunder in the Western Conference Finals that 73-9 season, only to have the Cavs do it against them in the finals. One team we're thinking about is the 76ers. Can they choke? One more quick thing, not to get on a tangent, but I know we were talking about the super teams. The reason why LeBron and Wade did work is they have really good chemistry. They're both really good team players, and they know how to make and inspire their teammates. That's something that Durant and Kyrie don't have. I know there was a debate about the most talented and skilled duos, and it was like LeBron and Wade versus Kyrie and KD. Well, LeBron and Wade have that ability to be team players, pass the ball, inspire their teammates much more so than Kyrie and KD. But as far as choking away series, Sixers were up 3-0, and then they got down to 3-1. Okay, Toronto taking one game at home, not a surprise. And then the Sixers lose by 15 on their own home floor. 15 against Toronto. Toronto Raptors, who are a cast of good players, but no, all due respect to Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, they don't have a legitimate superstar. I know Scotty Barnes can ball. I know OG Anunoby can ball, but those guys are not at the level of, say, the Pistons back in the day. I know the Pistons were like a squad of 4, but they were a squad of 4 all-stars, like Richard Hamilton, Chauncey Billups, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace, Tayshaun Prince. Those were all-star level players. As good as Scotty Barnes is, as good as OG Anunoby is, those are not all-stars. And like Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet are like as bad as it can get for an all-star, So the Sixers should have swept this series, quite frankly. Are they in trouble? Because we've seen James Harden get off to a good start in the playoffs and lose a series. We've seen Joel Embiid get off to a good start and lose the series. We've seen Doc Rivers blow multiple leads. He's the head coach in Philly. Let's not forget about him. Can the Sixers actually choke this series away? Because I think there's a decent chance that they might.
I'm about to make the same mistake I was just chastising myself on earlier.
Okay, let's go.
And not trusting, what my eyes and what my senses are telling me. And basically, I mean, it's partly math. Philadelphia has to win 1 game. Toronto has to win 2. I think it's easier to win 1 game than winning 2 games.
Sure.
And then, it's just like the pure talent is definitely on Philadelphia's side. Like, I'm looking over the box score and everything. I mean, like, it's the same thing we had with Kevin Durant, right? Like, is James Harden really going to shoot 4 for 11 from the field again, or is he going to like actually take some more shots and make some more shots? I mean, he's been off, and it doesn't really make sense why, because when he initially got to Philadelphia, like we were talking about Harden and Embiid, like they were Stockton and Malone running pick and rolls and pick and pops and everything.
Sure.
I'm leaning toward the 76ers surviving this series. But I mean, what was it that we had or I should say I had? I mean, maybe you had it too. Did we both have Nets Sixers
Yes.
in the ECF. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and wear that.
Let's
We'll wear
relive
that
that.
shingle. We'll wear that shingle. I mean, that's looking less and less likely. It definitely feels to me a little bit, Milwaukee, Miami type of thing, which we can get into as we talk about the other series.
And again, we're sleeping on Boston with your comment, which we'll have that in a little bit.
I think that Philly can hold on. I think that Philly can hold on and win the series. I mean, the last game they shot 38% from the field to Toronto's 51%. Like, there's some mean regression that's going to take place.
You love using that word.
It's a great way of just talking about things in general.
You love it.
I mean, I think it's going to be Philly. Is it bad that I wanted to be Toronto though?
No, I wanted to be Toronto too. I think
the big massive trade that the NBA had of Brooklyn and Philly and how this fixed everyone's problems and trading trash for treasure, and it's maybe just trash and trash. I want Toronto. I think Philly hangs on. I'm not super confident though, for sure.
I actually saw a meme that this was the first lose-lose trade in NBA history because it's just bad. And you're talking about seeing stuff with your eyes. This is James Harden's shooting percentages in these individual games. 35, and I'm rounding up or down. So 35%, 33%. He had 154%, 29%, and 36%. And he's shooting about 37, I think it was for the series. I mean, he is shooting in the mid 30% most of this series.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he shot. Sadly, that's what he shot the entire month of April. I know, your mean regression. It's I don't know what's going on with him. What in the world is going on with James Harden? He's never necessarily been the most accurate shooter, but he's been respectable. You look at his career averages, given how many threes he takes, right around 44%, whatever, roughly his career average. Pretty typical, average efficiency. He's not going to be a Durant or a LeBron, although Durant lost efficiency this last series. But I don't know how he has just not made any shots. And it's crazy because with the Nets, he took his scoring down, but he was more efficient last year. But it looks like this year, I don't know what it is with having less shots. Do you lose your rhythm? What's the problem? Because I mean, Joel Embiid has went out there in the media and said that he wants Harden to take more shots. And his was interesting. Joel's well, that's not my job. Maybe the coach should do it. And I feels in Philly, Joel Embiid is pointing fingers. He was pointing fingers at Ben Simmons. We had Doc Rivers last year say Ben Simmons, did they ask him, is he the point guard of the future? And he basically said no, which is that's okay. That's true. But it just doesn't look good for you when you've got your coach, your star player pointing fingers, and it doesn't look good for James Harden. I'm a firm believer. I'm okay with LeBron leaving Cleveland the first time. I get it. He didn't have the pieces around him to win a ring. But it seems like James Harden is hopping every season. It's and I know and maybe some of it's not the right situation for him. I know it's hard for me to judge. Sometimes we do have a string of not in the right situation, but it feels like James Harden and Paul George do this every time. They hop into a new team. The next season they hop into a new team. And for me, for Harden, didn't seem like he was hopping into a better winning environment at Philly than Brooklyn. So I don't know where his headspace is at. But I was just playing basketball on Saturday. Here's a funny story for you. And there was these two little kids. One was probably 7 or 8. The other one was maybe 10 or 11. And we were shooting around basketball. And I was just asking who their favorite players were. And one of the kids was mini LeBron. And the other kid was James Harden because he was a lefty. So I was calling him Harden. And whenever he missed it, I was oh, there's Philly Harden. And he's no, man, I'm OKC Harden. And I'm dang, we got to go back to OKC Harden. Because I don't know. As far as it just James Harden, I just don't get it. Like, I don't get what the problem is, but the level he's playing at right now, he's not a superstar. I know we were talking about last week, like, is Maxey taking the level of a superstar? Like, he's very good, but he's not quite there. Mm-hmm. So Philly really has one superstar right now, the way he's playing. I can't count James Harden as a superstar because the dude is shooting 37%. That's even worse than Russell Westbrook level. Yeah. So I think it's 50-50. I'm going 51% Philly only because they're going to have home court in Game 7, and they have Joel Embiid, who is still playing very well this series. His teammates are not playing great of late. He's playing great, but I'm going to pick Toronto in Game 6. And once you get to Game 7, you just never know. And we had Toronto and Philly Game 7 a couple of years ago. I believe, was Philly at home that series? I can't remember. I know Kawhi Leonard was on the team.
Yeah.
But we had Toronto, Philly Game 7 a couple of years ago. And who won that one? Toronto. So I would not be surprised if Toronto wins this series. It would not surprise me one bit. And I am also cheering for it, for the record, because now that we can't have Nets Sixers, I mean, it's whatever, you know. Let's enjoy that series. I will not be. Well, you know what? I lied. I might be making a locks of the week pick on Toronto in Game 6. I will not be betting on Game 7. I'll say that much.
Well, I'm sure that the Golden State Warriors will be sure to send a fruit basket to the Philadelphia 76ers saying, hey, thanks for erasing everyone's memory of blowing a 3-1 lead. You guys dropped a 3-0 lead. So I'm sure
I love it.
Golden State will be sending something along. Another series, 3-1. Probably going to be pretty short on this one. The Bulls, the Hawks, both of them down 3-1 respectively to the Bucks and the Heat. I mean, my answer is going to be no. The question, do either of these teams have a chance of coming back?
0% chance for both teams. I mean, the Bulls got a historic game for DeMar DeRozan in Game 2. Then Chris Middleton goes down with injuries. Here we are, tied at a game apiece. The Bulls are coming home to Chicago. Chris Middleton is hurt. The Bulls forget about avoiding the sweep. The Bulls have a chance in this series. Guess what? They choked. They blew it. How do you lose by 30 points on your home court in a 1-1 playoff series? Okay, I get it. It's Milwaukee. It's the defending champs. You can lose Game 3 and 4 at home. You cannot lose by 30 and then by 24. Back-to-back games. This series is toast. Zach LaVine might not play Game 5. Doesn't even matter if LaVine would play Game 5. And the Bucks, I mean, we'll talk about the favorite in the East coming up, so I'll save this for the next segment. But I absolutely love the Bucks roster. Like, the more I watch them, the more I fall in love with what the whole team does around Giannis. I know we talk about super teams. I think it can work if you guys are good, but I think it also work if you just have a great overall roster. As far as the Hawks, same deal. I mean, they did come back to win a game in that series, but the other games, they've lost 2 by 20 plus, 3 by double digits. They've scored 91, 105, 111, 86 points in this series. Trae Young is in a nightmare. He's got Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, like, you know, great defender after great defender going up against them. So no, I think both of those series are going to be a wrap in Game 5, and Chicago and Atlanta. Good on them for avoiding the sweep.
Yeah, I mean, the key to that sentence about Atlanta is they came back to win by 1 point. So, yeah, that's probably no shot. So now that we're kind of most of the way through a lot of the first round of the East, who do you think is most likely to come out and win? I think it's down to 3 teams, which is still a sizable number given it's the NBA, and typically there's 1, maybe 2 teams in each conference that we look at as like the, you know, proverbial odds-on favorite. But we've got 3 really, really solid options. 2 of them are going to be playing each other. So for me, it's Miami, it's Milwaukee, and it is Boston. So Who do you like out of that trio? Because I'm assuming you're not going to go Toronto on this one.
No, I'm not going to Toronto or Philly, and I agree with you. And we have 3, by the way, because of playoff Jimmy Butler. Playoff Jimmy Butler is the new playoff Rondo. Jimmy Butler is, I dare say this, Tom, regular season, and again, we went over this ad nauseum. The difference between the first best player and the 15th best player in the NBA is very small. I think there's a lot of guys who are pretty even right now. But if we were to put a spot on Jimmy Butler, he's probably in that 15 to 20 range in the regular season, if that. In the postseason, I probably put him in the top 5. He is definitely in the top 5 to 10 range. I mean, he is just a different animal come to playoffs. It is literally unbelievable what he's doing with Miami this season. It's unbelievable what he did in the bubble. It's just a different dude, playoff Jimmy Butler. That's the only reason why it's down to 3 teams. But for the sake of making this simple, I'm going to say it's down to 2 teams. I think the winner of Milwaukee or Boston is going to go to the NBA Finals out of the East. I really do. And I like Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee has more depth. I think Milwaukee has that next man up mentality. Chris Middleton goes down. What does Grayson Allen do? 22 points.
Jerk.
27 points. He's a horrible person. I'm not a fan of Grayson Allen, but the dude can play basketball. You can't question that. He is a good basketball player. He is a good basketball player. What's up? Like Bobby Portis, a role player? What is that saying? The role players play better at home? Maybe Bobby Portis is just used to the UC, or maybe he's a different breed of role player. Back-to-back double-doubles for Bobby Portis on the road, mind you. It's like these Bucks role players are just really, really good at basketball. And it's like any given night, it could be one of them. So their stats may not scream at you, but like Grayson Allen, Lopez, Connaughton, you look at Portis, you just never know. Drew Holiday, he was an Olympian on Team USA, and he had some really good games for Team USA. It's like any given day, any one of these guys can do that. And I think it took them a little time to develop that confidence. But Giannis sees it now. Giannis could have left for a super team, but I think he sees what he has there. Mm-hmm. And I made this post on Facebook and Twitter. I don't know if you caught it, Tom. And again, I'll say it again. The difference between best player, between first and 7th or 8th best in the league is very small. But if I were to pick one player who is the best player in the NBA, I think we've seen it. We've seen what happened with LeBron and Durant this season. And I think LeBron, it wasn't so much his fault, but I think LeBron and Durant, who have been regarded as the 2 best players in the league for a long time. And I do think Curry has belonged in that debate as well. But I think all 3 of those guys have taken a small step back. And all due respect to Jokic, who's a great player, all due respect to Embiid, Giannis, I think, is the best player in the NBA. I think you got to have a top dog, even if he's not too far ahead of anyone else. I am ready to proclaim Giannis as the top dog in the NBA. He's won 2 MVPs in a row. Then he wins Finals MVP. And he's going to make the finals again. I mean, what else did this guy have to do? He is top dog in the NBA today. Mm-hmm. And I'm very impressed with Boston's defense. Jason Tatum's becoming a next level star. I don't care. I still think Milwaukee has more depth. I think they've got the best player in the game. I like the Bucks to beat the Celtics. I like the Bucks to beat the Heat. I actually think Boston is better than Miami. The Bucks are going to have a tougher time in round 2 than round 3, but Milwaukee's got to be, for me. I know we want to make this into a 3-team, 4-team race, but I think Milwaukee is, even despite what Boston did, give them credit for beating the Nets, but the Nets were 44-38 this year. I think people are not talking enough about, it's not as impressive as it seems. So Milwaukee, to me, is a heavy favorite. I would bet Milwaukee versus the field to make the finals.
That'd be pretty solid. And it seems like it is our turn to jinx the deer up north, because I also really like the Bucks. I mean, it's backpedaling a little bit, but I did say winner of Brooklyn Milwaukee was going to win the Eastern Conference Finals. So winner of Milwaukee Boston sounds about right. I mean, Giannis is basically what I think a lot of people thought Anthony Davis was going to be, what Anthony Davis could be at his peak, like this just dominant force, because there's really no giants left in the NBA to stop or stand up to these guys. As you know, my favorite player pretty much anywhere right now is Drew Holiday, based on everything that he does. So
love him.
My favorite play of the NBA Finals last year is when he blocked DeAndre Ayton's shot. And it's like Drew Holiday's like what, 6'2", maybe 6'3", and he is ascending to this peak height and blocking a 7-footer's, attempt at the basket. It wasn't a full-on dunk. I think it was maybe a little bit of like a baby hook or something like that. I can't remember the exact play, but like that was like my favorite play of the entire NBA Finals. So yeah, I really like Milwaukee a lot. We'll have to see what happens with Chris Middleton and his MCL. I know that he's not necessarily superstar caliber, but he's like that half cut below. And he serves a really important role of being, when he gets hot shooting the ball, like he's incredible. Not to mention everything that he does defensively as well. So I really like Milwaukee out of the East as well. Moving to the Western Conference. So let's see. We've got the Grizzlies and the T-Wolves, a series that, as much as I liked the Timberwolves, I didn't think it was going to be 2-2 at any point. So it's anybody's series. It's a best of 3 at this point. What do you like?
It's wide open. And after they won game 1, I felt that it would be. I mean, it is 2 young teams who have simply not been at this stage. Literally, you can throw out all the expectations out the window because it is crazy. And what's funny is it should be 3-1 Minnesota. Like they blew 2 separate 20-point leads in one of the games this series. It should be 3-1 Minnesota. So I don't think anything would shock me in this series. We're talking about Jason Tatum taking the next level. It's very clear that Anthony Edwards is ready to take the next level in this playoff series. He's a very good player. Anthony Edwards is ready to be an NBA superstar, ready to be an all-star. Patrick Beverley, talk about guys with intangibles. Pat Bev, man, he brings so much to that Minnesota team. It is definitely a toss-up. I think it's 50-50. For the sake of making a pick, I'm going to take Memphis in 7 for 2 reasons. First and foremost, Ja Morant is shooting 40% from the floor this series. I saw some statistic out there. I know it was a mocking joke, so I don't know if it's statistically true. But at one point, the Instagram post was, for the first time in NBA playoff history, a player is leading the league in more or Instagram or tweet posts than field goals made. It said minimum 20 field goal attempts or posts made. So Ja Morant is out there posting on social media, but he's not delivering on the court. And I will borrow a term from you, Tom, regression to the mean. Ja Morant is one of the more accurate players in the league, obviously gets to the hoop a lot. I don't think he's going to shoot 40% the next 3 games in this series. So I give Memphis that edge. I also give him a very slight edge for the home court. That can lift a young team in a crazy environment. And I think Desmond Bane is another guy that's ready to take the next step in his game. I know we talk a lot about, like, it's just Ja Morant and these other guys, but I don't think we're giving Desmond Bane enough credit. Ja Morant clearly is, because Ja Morant won most improved player in the NBA, and he handed the trophy to Desmond Bane. So that shows you enough there. So total toss-up. But I'm going with the Grizzlies because they have Ja Morant, who struggled this series. I think he steps up, and they've got the home court. Look for Memphis to win in 7. But as they say, you get to game 7, throw out all the stats and records. You just never know.
Yeah, I mean, the Grizzlies have the best player in Ja Morant. And another key in their Game 4 loss, the score 119 for Minnesota, 118 for Memphis. Timberwolves had 15 more free throws attempted than the Memphis Grizzlies did. And I know that the Coach Taylor for the Grizzlies I believe he got fined for talking about that.
He was upset.
as far as
15,000.
that disparity. Yeah. So that's something that, whether referees take that into play consciously or not, I don't
They
think we're
got to
going to
even
see
up the
that
series,
level.
man. Got to
I don't
even
think
it
we're going to
up.
see that level of disparity. And, yeah, Minnesota, could be 3-1, but the fact that they've blown a couple of 20-point leads shows that they're not really ready for that moment. They're not going to have that killer instinct of putting a team away and keeping them away. So I like Memphis a little bit better in this one. I don't think they run the table and win it in 6. I think it gets to Game 7. But I like overall their poise. I like, just like Pat Beverly for the Timberwolves is there as like that veteran guiding presence. You've got Steven Adams, who not really playing a lot, but he's been in some big moments as well. I think that he can be a leader potentially. And then just Ja Morant is special, and I think he's going to show out as being special. I mean, we've seen, some of the best play that Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards can put together. We haven't seen the best of Ja Morant, and Memphis is still really, really tight in the series. So I like Memphis as well in a 7th game in one of the wonderful music cities that this country has to offer. Another
Love it. I love
2-2
Memphis. You've been there, it
series.
sounds like?
It has been a minute, but yes. I
Okay.
believe it was like 8th grade. I was in Memphis.
Oh, it's
For
great.
just
I've
a
been there
little bit.
multiple times because it was about an hour away from Jonesboro
Yep.
when I worked and lived in Jonesboro. So BO Street,
Fantastic place.
beautiful. Great place. Agreed.
Absolutely.
Great fan base, too.
Oh yeah, and one that transplanted fairly well. It used to be the Vancouver Grizzlies. They've gotten a nice little niche there in Western Tennessee. Almost like geographically an Eastern Conference team, but not quite. Just on the edge
Sure.
there. But we've got another 2-2 series. We've got Phoenix missing Devin Booker with, I believe it's an MCL strain. Pelicans playing exceptionally well, I think. Are the Phoenix Suns in danger of being, I believe, the 3rd number 1 overall seed? Because we had Dallas losing to Golden State back sometime in the Nowitzki years. And then we had the Bulls when Derrick Rose tore his ACL, losing to the 8 seed Philadelphia 76ers. So I think this might be the 3rd time potentially that a 1 seed has lost to an 8 seed. I'll check on that as get your thoughts on this one tied up at 2 apiece.
Why don't you look that up? Because I was about to do it, but actually, and I thought the Bulls were a 2 that year, but I'm seeing that the Nuggets with Dikembe Mutombo over the Supersonics in '94 was 1. But you look up the other ones
that's old time
and make sure. Yeah. I know it was the Warriors, I think, with Baron Davis over the Mavs that you mentioned. So I think the Suns are in trouble. I do think that it is, again, I think it's a very 50-50 series. Like the 76ers and Raptors, it's 50-50. I think the Grizzlies and T-Wolves is 50-50. We're probably going to agree here, just like, we picked the Sixers. We'll pick the Grizzlies, and we'll pick the Suns. They are the number 1 overall seed. It is a little weird to see them struggling this much. I know Devin Booker is out, but you look at what they did this season when Devin Booker was out, when Chris Paul was out, when DeAndre Ayton was out. Like, when those guys were out, they still kept winning games. Like, they've won without these guys. And even with Devin Booker off the team, and I'm not sure when he's coming back, but I don't think it's going to be like, I don't know. I got to look up that injury update. I should have. I think they're expecting him back for the next series.
Yeah, I've actually got that grade 1 hamstring strain. Can miss 2 to 3 weeks, and that was from April 1st. So he's still out for about same amount of time.
Right. So he may not come back this series, and if he does, he won't be the same. But even without him there, the Suns should be a better team. I think this is the time for Chris Paul to step up. I think it's the time for DeAndre Ayton to step up. I know we talk a lot about, like, DeAndre Ayton's a former number 1 overall pick. I know he adds a lot defensively. He does a lot of different things, but the dude can post up and score. Like, he's got a little bit of a mid-range shot, but he's a more traditional big man. He's not a three-point shooter. He's a post-up and score type big man, something that is a little bit lost in the game these days. And he obviously plays with a lot of wing players like Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Bridges, Crowder. So maybe they just don't look for him enough. But I'm a firm believer that DeAndre Ayton has the potential. He's not going to get 20 a game in Phoenix because he has 2 other all-star players who are more dominant players, but he has the potential on the right team to be a 20-10 guy. He is that talented. He's going to have to be a 20-10 guy over the next 2 or 3 games if Phoenix is going to win this series. So Brandon Ingram right now looks like the best player in this series. Even if Devin Booker was playing, the level that Ingram's playing at is phenomenal. He's playing better than Paul. He's playing better than Ayton. Valanciunas, I mean, talk about a guy who's been through the playoff round. Like, the dude looks like an all-star right now, and you would not expect that from him. And we'll see if there's a regression to the mean, as you like to say. But I will say this about your regression to the mean comment, Tom. I think that bodes well over maybe at the start of a 7-game series. I think it bodes well over an entire playoffs. But it is hard for regression to the mean to matter over 3 games because there is a rhythm. And it's a 3-game series right now. And anytime it's a 3-game series, the hot hand, that may not translate to the next series, but clearly it's working right now. And if you ask the Pelicans, like, you got to think that they believe they can beat the Suns. And I wouldn't put it past them. I really wouldn't. I'm leaning Phoenix. They've got the better roster. They've got, in theory, the best star player. But we'll see. Brandon Ingram is balling. So, and CJ McCollum's a really good player. I mean, think about the Pelicans if, and I know there's a lot of question marks, is Zion even going to want to play there? But if Zion comes back to them and can be himself, and they have CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, like, that could be a young team for the future. We talk about the Grizzlies and T-Wolves. Pelicans are just like those guys. The Cavs as well. There's a lot of good young talent. I don't think there's ever been the NBA is in a better position now than ever. I know there's going to be the old school people that always like to say our team is better. I thought for the longest time, Tom, I thought that the NBA had more stars now, but it used to have more good total teams back in the day. I look at the modern day NBA right now, there's more stars and more good total teams because the Pelicans are a good basketball team. And the fact that they were that much under 500 this season shows you how good the league is right now. So, yeah, they've got a shot. It's a 3-game series. Mm-hmm. I give them about a 45 to 47% chance. I'm picking the Suns. But are they in legitimate trouble? I think so. I think so because you take out that first half in game 1, the Pelicans have been the better team. They were the better team in the second half of game 1. And even the game that Phoenix won, I mean, it wasn't that convincing, right? So I think they're in big trouble, sure.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one because, without Devin Booker, Brandon Ingram is the best player in this series. And I think that, Phoenix is in trouble. I'm going to go Pelicans on this one. I think the Pelicans can definitely be, and I looked it up, they will be the 5th 8th seed. We had, you mentioned, let's see, it was the Supersonics, the Nuggets over the Supersonics, and then in 1999, the New York Knicks, who were an 8th seed, defeated the number 1 overall Heat in 1999. So
and they made the finals that year too.
They did, yeah. So I think that's definitely. I'm going like opposite of you. I'm going like 55% chance for the Pelicans in this one because their record is below 500, but the team that they were post trade deadline when they picked up CJ McCollum is a very different one. I mean, when you look at how the teams are constructed on the court, you've got, you mentioned DeAndre Ayton being a 20-10 guy. It looks like the Pelicans have a 20-15 guy in Jonas Valanciunas, somebody who not necessarily as athletic as DeAndre Ayton, but, can match up well enough where he's not going to be the sole dominant post force on the floor at any given point in time. And what the Suns are missing without Devin Booker is somebody who can really get their own shot. I mean, Chris Paul can still do that at times, but at this point in his career, he's not at the peak of his athletic ability. He's much more of a facilitator, and that only works if everybody else is doing their job when you're facilitating for them. I mean, when Chris Paul was out, you have a Cameron Payne who can step up as a facilitator, but Cameron Payne not necessarily really a great scorer. It's a lot harder to replace Devin Booker on this team because of all these guys who, they can get their buckets, but they're all like secondary and tertiary options off of what Booker and Paul facilitate on the offensive end. DeAndre Ayton absolutely needs to step up in order for Phoenix to win this series. But, looking at the Pelicans, not as deep as a team, not as talented as a team, but guess what? It's playoff time. You only are going to go 7, maybe 8 deep for a really consistent rotation. And when you look at, top 5 overall players, I mean, Ingram playing fantastic, Valanciunas playing fantastic, CJ McCollum playing fantastic, even Herbert Jones is showing up a little bit in this series. So I think that the Pelicans have just enough to win this series. I don't think it's going to go, much farther than that, but Pelicans are showing something. I'm pretty impressed with how they're playing. And, I think Phoenix is in real trouble without their best player on the floor in Devin Booker.
And I still think Chris Paul is the best player in this series, just hasn't played like it, but we'll see. I do think it is definitely harder to adjust when you lose your leading scorer because, as you mentioned, the secondary, tertiary guys, because like the Bucks, like with Middleton, with how many great role players they have, he's their second leading scorer. A lot easier adjustment to make than losing your leading scorer. So that's pretty interesting. Mavs Jazz 3-2 Mavericks. They just beat the Jazz by 25 points the last game.
Yeah.
Is this series over?
I mean, I think so, right? I mean, Utah had its opportunity to put this away early, and they allowed, the Max Kleba 8 for 8 from 3 to happen. They allowed Jalen Brunson to put up was like 41. They allowed that to happen. You can't do that and win a series. I mean, your stars are supposed to win you like 2 out of the 4 games. Your second star is supposed to win you one of the games, and you're supposed to have role players. Well, the Mavs have had that on multiple occasions, which means with Luka coming back and playing the way that he did in Game 5, pretty much to me signals that this one is Dallas. The Mavericks finally going to break that hex that they have with Luka Doncic. I mean, the Jazz just aren't playing very well at all. Donovan Mitchell is a volume shooter. He's been off all series, and for as vaunted of a defense as Utah has, they've been giving up way too many open looks. I forgot the tweet that my old classmate Jonathan Deutsch, you remember him from Mizzou.
Sure.
He had something about Dallas taking a large amount of open threes and then a large amount of wide open threes. And he posed the question, I don't remember what the exact numbers are, but he posed the question, is this a function of the Mavericks offense or is this a function of the Utah Jazz defense? And of course, it's a little bit of both, but without a Kristaps Porzingis, Dallas is kind of going with a really small lineup, which allows a lot of drive and kick. And with Rudy Gobert, fantastic defensive player, but not a perimeter guy. So I think, quite frankly, the Jazz are just getting caught in a bad matchup at this point. They're not able to adjust and overcome what Dallas has been able to do. So, similar to the Philadelphia thing, Dallas has to win 1, Utah has to win 2. And I don't see Utah, unlike Toronto, who has some precedent for being able to do that, I don't think Utah has that in them.
No, Utah is that classic, really good regular season team that just doesn't do well in the postseason. The Atlanta Hawks were that team a few years back. They're just not built to succeed in the playoffs, and that's because, all due respect to Donovan Mitchell, he's had some great playoff games, but he's also just wildly inconsistent. He's a second-tier star. Rudy Gobert is their second-best player. He's a defensive player that is a more traditional center that will have blocks at the rim and get rebounds. Like, they don't really, like, if Mitchell's shot's not going down, they're not built to win a series, quite frankly. So they're always going to be that team that, maybe they get some wins in the regular season, but it's hard to take them seriously in the playoffs unless they got, another legitimate star. And you see it, like, when the NBA, like, players pick all-star players, like, where do Mitchell and Gobert get picked? Right at the bottom. Like, that tells you what the rest of the NBA players think when you have these all-star level players. Are they all-star players? Yes. But are they elite all-stars? No. And, I mean, Dallas was up 2-1 without Luka Doncic. 2-1 without Luka Doncic. Like, that tells you enough. Like, Game 4, Luka comes back, whatever. I think they lost by 1 point. Like, he had to get back in center, to get back to ready. What happened in Game 5? Luka had 33 points, 15 rebounds. It actually took him a little bit to get going in the first half. In the third quarter, it was the Luka show. I mean, they just won game 5 by 25 points. Like, this series is over. Dallas can win on the road. Dallas can do whatever they need to do. They're actually favored in the next game, and I actually don't think it's going 7. Dallas takes care of business in game 6. Mavs move on. What will be not only Luka's first playoff series win, it'll ironically be Dallas's first series win since winning the championship. How often do you win the championship? In 2011 it was, and then go 11 years without winning a playoff series, coming off a championship win. That in itself is crazy. And I do think the Suns will beat the Pelicans, and maybe Devin Booker gets back to healthy. Maybe Phoenix figures it back out, but man, it could be setting up well for the Mavericks, who would then play the Suns or Pelicans. They get to the Western Conference Finals maybe against the Warriors. That could be fun.
Absolutely, that would be. Speaking of the Warriors, they've got a 3-1 series lead on the Nuggets. Nuggets winning game 4. Is this anything more than the dead cat bounce comment, or do you think this one's over?
It's over. I have this written down. Nuggets have no shot. They had the heart to win one game. Jokic doesn't have enough around them. Warriors win game 5 at home. Easy. I know I talk a lot. I bring up a lot of stats. That's all I have to say on that.
I believe I answered the question you had in the rundown, just verbatim. No chance for Nuggets over Warriors. So great individual season for Nikola Jokic, but as we said leading into the series, he just doesn't have enough around him because the 2 other best players on the team still injured. So maybe next year, for my dark horse NBA Finals pick, I'll roll them again next year, more likely than not. We can mark the tape on that one.
Why not?
So that leads us now to who's coming out of the West, and I think actually kind of opposite of the East, where we can say 2, maybe 3 teams. I think it's fairly clear cut. The one team that is the favorite. I mean, I'm going Golden State on this one. I don't really have a whole lot to add because I think we both had them coming out in our initial NBA playoff preview. But I'm sticking with Warriors because nobody's shown me anything to the contrary.
Yeah, I feel better and better every day about my Warriors NBA Finals pick. I'm probably putting the jinx on them right now, but my goodness. I mean, the Warriors, I know we're talking about the Bucks and Celtics, but the Warriors look like the clear number 1 team in the NBA right now. And I think that's kind of like what I was thinking all along. I know the Suns kind of, drew me around a little bit with their success, but the Warriors, I mean, we hadn't seen Draymond, Steph, and Clay together for literally years. We're seeing them together in the playoffs for the first time, with the exception of, I think it was like 13 seconds where they randomly put Draymond, who was hurt or something, just so he can be back in Clay's debut or something like that. And then they thought they were going to have him down the stretch, but then Steph gets hurt. Those 3 together are deadly, and now we have the emergence of Jordan Poole. And I talked about this a lot last week, but Jordan Poole is a mini Steph Curry. The dude can shoot off the dribble. He can come off screens. He can shoot the ball. He's athletic. And now you all of a sudden have 3 guys like Steph, Clay, and Jordan Poole. They can catch and shoot and score right away. 3 incredible 3-point shooters. Just makes it so easy for you out there in the court. Andrew Wiggins is an athletic player. He can shoot the ball a little bit. Draymond Green, you were talking about facilitating, a guy that looks better when he facilitates. Well, Draymond Green plays defense, and he's a great passer of the ball. So you don't want Draymond Green to be your best player because his skill set is useless passing the ball because, he's not a shooter. He needs guys he can pass the ball to. Draymond Green can look around and say, oh, I've got Jordan Poole here. I've got Klay Thompson. I've got Steph Curry. I've got Andrew Wiggins. I mean, I've got these young bucks off the bench like Gary Payton, like Kuminga. He's like, I can run with these guys. I think he's having a good time. Golden State is hands down the favorite in the West, and especially even like this Middleton injury. Like, who knows? Middleton, Booker, maybe they come back, but I don't know if they're going to be the same. I don't know if Boston's big man, if he's going to be the same. Like, the Warriors are finally healthy. They've dealt with so many injuries, like Clay, Draymond, and Steph. They're healthy and they're fresh at the right time. Their biggest issue is, who are we going to start? That's when you know you're a good team, because in all honesty, Tom, they have 5 perimeter players who are all-stars. That's literally what they have. Steph Curry's an all-star. Draymond's an all-star. Clay's an all-star. He wasn't an all-star because he didn't play in the first half of the season. Wiggins made the all-star team this year, and Jordan Poole, if he was starting every game, is an all-star level player. They have 5 all-star level perimeter players. The NBA is all about the perimeter guys these days. And quite frankly, like, what teams with big men can scare them? I mean, maybe Giannis, like, that might be the one guy that they can't stop. But I mean, Jokic, like, is doing quite well against them, but he doesn't have any help. Like, Ayton's a good player, but he's not that level big man. Like, there's not, like, Davis, he's been hurt. Like, even if he was playing, he wouldn't be ready at this point. I mean, the only way I can see the Warriors getting knocked off is if they face a really good big man. And the only team that, if I'm a Warriors fan, scares me is the Bucks, and you wouldn't play them till the finals if they get there. I mean, the Mavs are a perimeter team. The Suns are a perimeter team. Who's going to stop these guys? They're hands down the favorite in the West.
Absolutely. Hands down favorite in the West, perhaps favorite overall. I think Milwaukee Golden State matchup would be really, really fun to watch, just because of how different the two different teams play. So we'll definitely be touching on the NBA as the first round wraps up. Second round begins heading into next week. We'll have any major updates, whether there's players coming back from injury that could be significant, such as Devin Booker for Phoenix, if the Suns should survive. Say that 10 times fast.
You don't think it'll happen?
I don't think it'll happen, but definitely going to be a fun thing to see. Another fun thing to see, really quickly, we'll touch on the Diamond. Miguel Cabrera, future Hall of Famer, gets to 3,000 hits, already has 500 home runs. So where does he rank on the list of all-time great baseball players? I'm willing to let you parse this if you want to just say all-time great baseball hitters, because if we're saying all-around overall player, I know for me, defense, base running, not super strengths of his, so that kind of knocks him down as far as, like, not as good as, say, like a Willie Mays, who could do just about everything on the baseball field. But where does Miggy sit for you as far as the pantheon of baseball greatness?
Yeah, and Willie Mays is a rare example of a true 5-tool player.
For sure, yeah.
And Willie Mays is so great at defense, so great at base running. I will be completely honest with you, Tom. The two things that get most overrated in baseball is how good of a defense you play and how good of a base runner you are, especially in the modern day game. And that's why I think that Cabrera's not going to get his due all time, because you look at the guys these days, especially the leading base stealers are getting like 40 stolen bases a game. Like, we don't have this Ricky Henderson 100 stolen bases. It just doesn't happen. Even in those scenarios, like 1 stolen base a game, which no one has averaged, it's like you're getting yourself 1 base further like half the time. It just, the value of that is not so huge. And you look at, like, even defense, like, okay, Willie Mays is an extreme example because Willie Mays did rob a lot of runs with his great catches. But a lot of these baseball players play really good defense. I mean, Miguel Cabrera is not out there dropping the ball at first base. So that's just one thing that I want to just throw out there. The 5-2 player, what's most important in baseball? I would say hitting for average and hitting for power. Miguel Cabrera has done both of those. He's one of 7 players in baseball history. 7 players, Tom, with 500 home runs and 3,000 hits. And wait for it, one of 3 players that has achieved those 2 marks and hit over 300 for his career. He's a 310 batting average lifetime player. So he's got to be top 10 all time as far as hitters. I'll take pitchers out of this equation because it's a whole different debate. But if you were to do non-pitchers, top 10 all-time hitter, top 15 all-time player because the ability to do it for average and for power, it's just something very few guys do, and very few guys do it in this era. I'll have more on that in sports trivia. So give Cabrera his due. And of the 5 tools, I would say hitting for average and power are way, way more important than base running and defense, personally.
Well, we'll be free to differ on that. When I say as far as like overall baseball player, I mean, just baseball just has such like a deep, rich history. Like it might sound like a slight to say that he's like a top 40 type of player all time.
Top
All things
40?
I will.
You're hating.
I'm including pitchers in this one because like
Okay.
I know it's like it would be easy to say like
Okay.
separate them out type of thing. He's a top 25 hitter to be sure. I mean, he's just incredible as an offensive
Top
force.
25 overall non-pitcher. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, then we can be more on the same page
Yeah.
because I've got him right in that 15 to 20 range. So you may downgrade him a little bit.
Yeah,
but
just 'cause, like-
that's more fair.
Because as far as like the base running thing, like yeah, steals is one thing, but just overall like ability to run the bases and to do that well, like that's an underrated skill that's not easy to quantify, and certainly fielding. I think like across the board, he's like a negative on defense, and like he more than hits to make up for the fact that he's a negative on the field. But when it comes to talking about like all around players, I like guys who are like, I know Willie Mays is like an exception to the rule, but like a Ken Griffey Jr., where he's able to do, a little bit of everything. Barry Bonds, once upon a time, before the steroids, like he did everything across the board to help the team win. So, if we're talking like pure hitting, Miggy's like top 10, top 15. If we're talking overall position player, I have, I'd say top 25 is probably a good place to put him. But certainly as far as, the hitting accolades, I mean, you listed it with, the batting average, home runs, hits and everything. He's in rarefied air as far as those accomplishments go. So, I think we can do like a show salute for his accomplishment on that front. And certainly it's been like a fun, enjoyable player who doesn't take the game too seriously. We see him, joking around with other players at first base, making them laugh. Of course, his fan interactions are a lot of fun to watch as well. So overall, just like a fun baseball player. I'm really, really glad, that we get to see a person of his caliber as well as a player of his caliber achieve, these great heights for, undoubtedly a first ballot Hall of Famer. We'll see if it's unanimous because somebody's going to have a gripe about something, as they always do with the Baseball Writers Association. But definitely a great achievement for an all-time great hitter.
Yeah, and put this into perspective. I think it was his rookie season, I believe, you probably remember this. Maybe you were not as upset about it as I was as a Cubs fan at the time. But Tom, one of my all-time favorite sports teams, you know me, like I'm obsessed with sports, but baseball used to be like my number 1 sport, and it's now like my number 5. I still really enjoy it, but I simply don't watch as many full baseball games as I used to. I would say I'm fairly in the know because I actually do go and check out the stats. I watch some games. I watch a boatload of SportsCenter. So every night I know everything that happened in baseball just from watching SportsCenter alone. But back in 2003, the 03 Cubs were one of my all-time favorite teams. I loved Kerry Wood, Mark Pryor, Carlos Zambrano. Like I loved the pitching and the dominance they had. I loved the, Sosa, Moises Alou. Like I was obsessed with that 03 playoff team. And I was convinced they were going to break the curse. They went up 3-1. Like that literally, like outside of maybe like prime Barcelona Messi, I'm a huge Barcelona and Messi fan. That may have been like maybe the second sports team I was most invested in like ever. And it just, I think about that when I saw this accomplishment by Cabrera. It is now 2002. He was a rookie on that 2003 team. I was, I believe, in 8th grade at the time. That team that like shattered my hearts as a Cubs fan. Like that was 2003. This dude is in the majors and still doing it big. It is now 2022. That in itself puts his career into perspective. That is just wildly impressive. And by the way, Tom, this season, Miguel Cabrera is hitting 319 on the season for the Detroit Tigers, hitting really well, much, much better than the rest of baseball hitters have. More on that during sports trivia.
Do you want to be mad about something?
Yes.
I looked this up on ESPN. ESPN has Miguel Cabrera, and they published this, I believe, in like February of this year. So it is recent.
Yeah, probably like 57th best player.
59th.
59th. Yeah,
and this is including position
pitchers.
players, pitchers, and I believe this also includes Negro League players as well as
well, that
the
would
past
make sense
offseason.
why it'd be a little lower.
Yeah, baseball, integrated, kind of.
Okay.
Like retroactively whitewashed a little bit of what they did as far as that goes. So I think that plays into it a bit as well. But
it makes me a little mad, but the fact that they do include the fact that they include pitchers and the fact that they include Negro League players makes a little more sense because, like, I say 15 to 20 for hitter, but I actually think pitchers are more valuable. So I would have them probably in that 45 range. But then you factor in the Negro players, I can maybe get them in that 50 range. I would put them a little higher than that 59, but it's not as far off if you factor in all of that. I just think that, like, the speed and defense, I think, gets a little overhyped. Like, in a given baseball game, like, as a team, every team commits less than one error per game on average. Like, Miguel Cabrera may not be a Gold Glover, but in a given season, he's committing like very few errors over at first base. So it is like he's in a given season, maybe comparatively to the average first baseman, costing his team 3 or 4 more runs in a season. Maybe he's committing 2 or 3 more errors that often don't lead to a run. Maybe he's not saving 3 or 4 plays, but like how much is he really costing his team? I don't think it's that much. But that's just my take on it.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps it up for the topics of discussion. Now we move on to locks of the week, which as a show,
dreadful.
I might have just we weren't all that great.
You were good.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but how about you give us the recap?
Yeah, so we are still doing pretty good on the season as a whole. I was doing pretty good the last few weeks. I think we have a winning record as a whole, but I was doing well, but just a dreadful week. I was talking about all these 2-1 weeks, how I was due for a 3-0. I clearly jinxed myself like we jinxed the Nets. How about an 0-for last week? 0-for. 0-3 last week. I had the Bucks minus 9.5 over the Bulls. The Bulls won that game 114-110. Wouldn't you know? The Bulls are 2-2 against the spread in this series. For the record, Tom, I placed bets all 4 games against the hometown Bulls. I went 2-2 in those bets, but 0-2 on locks of the week. So, of course, the weeks that I had them in locks of the week, it didn't hit. It's crazy because following that game, they lost by 30 and they lost by 24. Talk about bad timing for locks of the week. I had the Suns minus 9.5 over the Pelicans. Pelicans winning 125-114. That was in game 2. Suns were on track to cover at halftime. Devin Booker was red hot. He goes down, and there goes my bet. So a little bit of bad luck there. We do make our picks several days ahead as well. Nets plus 3.5 at the Celtics. My goodness. They were up 17 points in that game. I was sitting pretty. Didn't matter. Kevin Durant went 0-for in the second half from the field. Celtics winning 114-107. Tom, you had that one as well. You missed that one. But you did pretty good on your NBA picks otherwise. You got the other 2 just barely. 76ers minus 1.5 at the Raptors in game 2. Philly had to rally there. and actually got a buzzer beater to win by 3, or almost a buzzer beater by Embiid. I think it was with just under a second, but basically a last second shot, three ball to win it by 3. And then you had the Warriors minus 1.5 at the Nuggets in game 2. Warriors winning by 5. Drew Brackett threw darts as he normally does. Did not do very well with this Barca Open tennis prediction. I actually, what is that thing? I faded Drew on this one. I just had a feeling, and this is why I did it. So Grigor Dimitrov, or Dimitrov, as Bulgarians would say. I'm a Bulgarian. Grigor. He is just a notorious guy for just not performing at the level he should. So he plays a lot of matches that tend to go a lot of games, because anytime that he should be favored to win a match, he either loses the match or it goes into extra sets. So I actually went against Drew and went out and bet on this and won. It was 21.5, under 21.5 games. Dimitrov and Federico Correa. It was wrong. Grigor for Bulgaria lost the first set 4-6, won the next two, 6-3, 6-4, 29 total games. Then Drew got his typical soccer over-under wrong. He typically gets it right, actually, but he was wrong on this one. He had, you know what, Tom? Drew was 0 for 3 also. I told you 1 and 2. I misread it. He was 0 and 3. All right, well, there you go. So I think you're in first place now, by the way. You had Dallas and Houston under 2.5 goals. It was 2-1 Dallas, 3 goals there. And you had Joey Logano to finish better than Brad Keselowski in the NASCAR Geico 500. Brad Keselowski 23rd, Joey Logano 32nd. So Drew was 0 and 3 actually. So I got to make an addendum on the standings. So I want to actually ask you his record. I think I've got him at 66 and 58 and 2 then, right?
So I have my updated standings. I have myself at 66, 59 and 3.
I'm Drew way back. Yeah.
Drew is 66, 60 and 2.
Yes, that sounds right.
All right, and then I have you. Do you want yours as well, or you caught up?
I don't want to hear it.
You don't want to hear it?
It's ugly. It is ugly.
Well, I can do a little bit of a salute later on this if you like. I might wait a couple of weeks. I think I'll hold off on my salute. But
okay.
I do have the records from last year, and I don't think you should feel quite as badly, given the current status of our show on Locks of the Week. But
okay,
we tied
last year, you and I.
We did. We tied with a losing record, and as a show as a whole, we're all doing better across the board, at least positionally speaking. So, Locks of the Week.
Over 500 as a show. Over 500 as a show.
Exactly.
Mainly due to your greatness. So go ahead, Mr. Great Tom.
Well, it's also Drew Brackett as well. Go ahead and just read off his picks really quickly once the image pops up here, because I wrote it in shorthand on my notes. I want to make sure I have everything right so people know exactly where to go to place these different wagers. So starting with Wednesday, April 27th, the ATP Bavarian International Tennis Championships. I can't believe that missed the cut on our rundown. Alex Molcan versus Casper Ruud, under 20.5 games. And then on April 30th, that's a Saturday, we have a couple of football matches in La Liga. We have Deportivo Alaves versus Villarreal CF, under 2.5 goals.
Villarreal, Tom. Come on now.
Villarreal. I guess that, technically, would it be Villarreal? Because it's that double L, and if it's La Liga.
Yeah, it might be. It might be in Spain. I guess the American announcers pronounce it Villarreal, but it might be Villarreal. That's a good question. And it's Deportivo Alaves.
Alaves. Oh, a little bit of that nice lisp at the end there. So they must be from the Basque region, of course. And then in Major League Soccer, CF Montreal versus Atlanta United, also under 2.5 goals for that one as well. So a couple of soccer matches for everyone to keep an eye on, as well as some tennis as well. For me, you know how I like to roll common. One, whenever I get a lead in Locks of the Week, I like to just give it right the heck back. but also NFL draft is coming up, so I am going with an all NFL draft card. Let me roll up the sleeves here. So
I'm going to write these down.
This has been a challenging year for me to find anything because so many of the things that I liked are like heavily, heavily juiced.
Okay.
Speaking of which, is it 120 or 125 that we're doing as like a juice limit?
I can't 125 remember. Is fine. I can't remember, but I'll give you 125 given all the upsets we've had. And you've been giving us all these plus money bets lately.
haven't hit one yet.
You can take your 125 if you would like.
All right. So starting off, this is actually at minus 120. Give me John Mechie under 56.5 draft position. So he will go at or before the 56th overall pick in the draft, which is the 24th pick of the second round. I think he's going to go before there. Like we talked about with sleepers, he's coming off an injury, but he's just too good for a team to not take a chance on him. Let's see. Give me the Atlanta Falcons minus 125 to take a wide receiver with their first overall pick in the draft. Their current number one wide receiver is a man by the name of Olamide Zaccheaus, who had 31 catches last year. Exactly. With Calvin Ridley out for gambling suspension. I mean, you've got Kyle Pitts as a weapon, but Atlanta, quite frankly, doesn't have a ton of weapons. They could go quarterback, but in a weak class like this, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they started out their rebuild with, let's get talented players around so that next year's draft we can go and get a starting QB. So give me Atlanta to pick a wide receiver with their first pick. And then, do I want to take the folks to Value Town Common?
Do it. You're due. I think you're 0 for 2. You're 0 for 2, or you got the juice lines. Let's get some plus money in here.
Plus 155.
All right. That's not too bad.
Travon Walker over 1.5 on the draft position. Here's my thinking with this. Currently, Travon Walker is the current betting favorite to go number 1 overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. But from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of discord. Doug Peterson, the head coach, wants Jacksonville to go offensive tackle. A lot of people, a lot of scouts in that front office want to go Aiden Hutchinson off the edge. It's Trent Baalke who's really intrigued and wants to go with, and Trent Baalke is the general manager for Jacksonville. He really likes Travon Walker, a player who has a lot of traits, a lot of skills, but not necessarily production coming out of Georgia. So he's the betting favorite. I think it's been fluctuating all over the place. I think he's been as high as like minus 400 to go number 1 overall. But I'll go ahead on the other side and say, plus 155, there's a chance something else could shake out. There's a slight chance, not necessarily likely, because teams aren't going to want to trade up in a draft that's weak at the top to draft number 1 overall. I don't think anybody's going to trade in to get, an offensive tackle that they really, really want, for example. But basically, I'm just going to be sitting there, fingers crossed, that Travon Walker's name is not the first one off the board. If he's anything other than the number 1 overall pick in the draft, that lock clears. So plus 155 on that one. So that negates a little bit of that juice.
I like it, Tom. For the record, Travon Walker, I know we were talking about steal of the draft. I think he's the most overrated player in this draft. I love production. His production at Georgia was not great. I'll be completely honest with you. I was like, what? Like, I just looked at a recent mock draft because it feels like it was Hutchinson forever. And it felt like that is, the smart pick. Then I look up and I'm see like, what? Walker? And then I looked up his stats and I'm like, what? And they're doing it based on potential. I just don't see it. So I think it'd be a terrible pick if you got picked first overall. So I agree with you there. Looking forward to a fun week. Maybe we can go 9-0 this week. I've just put the jinx on us again, but that's okay. Eventually, the jinx has to be unjinxed. So this is what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with this pick. Speaking of unjinxing, 3rd time's the charm. I mentioned that I've bet against the Bulls every game this series. I am 2-2 overall, 0-2 on the show. I am due for a show win. I'm going to go with Bucks minus 12 over the Bulls. I believe that is on Wednesday, or is that Thursday, Tom?
That is Wednesday. Yeah.
Wednesday. This is recording on a Tuesday. You'll like this, Tom. I got no night of bets. So a lot of folks that will be watching the show will have the opportunity to make on all our picks prior to it happening. So Bulls are dead. They just lost by 30 and 24 the last two games. Zach LaVine's in health and safety protocols. He might not play. Even if he does somehow magically play, I don't think it matters. Like, Chris Middleton got hurt. It didn't matter. The Bucks role players are so good. I talked about Grayson Allen, back-to-back games over 20 points. Talked about Bobby Portis, back-to-back double-doubles. The Bulls still can't stop Giannis. Like, there's no one that can stop him. So Bulls will lose big. Milwaukee covers that game and wins the series. Definitely Milwaukee all the way. Then I like the Raptors plus 1.5 against the Sixers. We talked about it, man. Toronto's at home. They've won 2 straight. Philly is fading. Maybe they win game 6. Maybe they win game 7. But right now, I like Toronto to win game 6 at plus 1.5. You can even bet Raptors plus money to win straight up, because I think that they're heating up. They're confident. And the Sixers are in trouble in this series. So give me the Raptors to win game 6. And then finally, I like the Mavs minus 2.5 over the Jazz in game 6. Luka's back, back with the bang, 33 points and 15 rebounds the last game. They were winning the series without Luka. Now he's back and healthy. You kidding me? Mitchell, even if he does play, is a shadow of himself this series. He's ice cold. Mavs coming off a 25-point win. All they got to do here is to win by 3 or more. Give me the Mavs minus 2.5 over the Jazz. So Bucks minus 12 over the Bulls, Raptors plus 1.5 against the 76ers, and Mavs minus 2.5 over the Jazz.
All right. All sounds good to me. Moving on now to trivia. I've got a draft-related question for you, Common, and it might be easy, might not. I think it's going to be either easy or a stumper. There's no middle ground on this one. There's one person and one person only who has been drafted in both the first round for the NFL and the first round for Major League Baseball. Can you name that player?
Kyler Murray?
It is, in fact, Kyler Murray.
Yeah!
Drafted first round, obviously 1-1 by the Arizona Cardinals. Also drafted first round by the Oakland Athletics and offered a sizable signing bonus before he decided to go to the NFL. So, that's the player.
I like it. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Kyler, because he's got all the potential, but a lot of question marks about his consistency, decision-making, maturity, etc. And at this point, I'm wondering, would he be a better baseball player? I don't know. Would he ever consider playing baseball? I don't know. So something to think about.
That's got to be, this is more of not necessarily trivia, but would it be more difficult to pick up playing baseball again, or would it be more difficult to pick up playing football again? I think baseball would be harder.
I think baseball would be harder in most cases. I'm not necessarily sure that it would be harder than playing the quarterback position. Because I think in football, you can get away with athleticism as a running back, receiver, cornerback. I know there's obviously technique involved in all those, but you can get away with it more. I think that the speed of the NFL game, in overall, I agree, hitting a curveball when you haven't done it in so long. Just ask Michael Jordan, one of, if not the best athlete of all time. He played baseball in high school. Ask him how hard it was to hit a double-A curveball. But otherwise, I would say for the quarterback, it might be tougher only at that position. But there it's close. Overall, I agree baseball. But since Kyler's a quarterback, I'm not sure. Because the NFL game moves really fast as a quarterback. Yeah. You don't have a lot of time to get rid of it.
That's an important distinction to make. Absolutely. What is your sad trivia?
All right, sad baseball trivia. This is kind of a statement, but also trivia. So it is obviously early in the season, but right now the MLB league average for batting average, Tom, is 231. That is the lowest league average in MLB history. And this was as of a couple days ago. I saw it online. I double checked today, and it is still 231. So it hasn't moved a lot. This stat may have moved slightly, but as of a couple days ago, there was 56 hitters who were hitting below 200. Oof. 56 hitters in the league. 231, all-time worst average in baseball history. Can you name the second lowest average in history and the year? And I'll start off the bat and tell you right now that our parents did not see this. And
okay, yeah. So I was thinking like dead ball era baseball.
Yes.
Somewhere in like the 19 teens, something like that. So like 1916.
You got to go even further back.
Like 1905?
Even further back.
1892.
You're really close. Still got to go further back.
1888?
1888 was the second worst batting average season. Can you guess what the average was?
So you said it's 231 now. It's something like 237, 238, like a little bit better.
239. So an entire 8 points better. It's not way better, but that is the second lowest. We're going back to 1888. Like, I know, like, home runs are cool, but it's just, and I like pitchers, I like strikeouts, but it's just a bad look for baseball. It is, and that's why it's sad trivia. It's a bad look at a time where the game is suffering, at a time where, like, you need to get better. And that's where analytics, like, are sort of, like, they help the pitchers because they have all this advanced data on where to pitch guys. They have these shifts. I would like to see the batters, because think about this. Like, yes, you want to hit a home run, but you got to have some personal pride. I mean, like, growing up, the league average was around 260 or so. Like, you were getting a hit more than 25% of your at-bats. Now you're getting a hit less than 25% of your at-bats. Like, as a hitter, like, don't you have some pride to go up to the plate and want to get on base and, like, want to get a base hit? I mean, like, great, you can hit a home run, but, like, you got to get on base.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the Cubs traded away, like, all their hitters last year, but someone at karaoke pointed out something to me. He's like, well, these new guys get on base. The Cubs are leading the league in average, and they're right around 500, which is better than they were last year. Something to think about. But it's not a good look. And I would think baseball could come exciting if we have all these guys now, these big power hitters. I think Anthony Rizzo did this the other day. If you get shifted, bunt it down the third base line, get your butt to first base. That's what these teams need to do. These managers need to have reverse analytics. Like, what are the analytics of how can we beat this? Because the league average should not be 230. Like, I just think it looks terrible. You look next to a player's, like, box score, and we're saying that an average player can hit 230. I mean, like, if you were hitting 230, you weren't going to get a chance to hit anymore in past years. You were getting benched. Like, it's just bad. It is really bad.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's that money ball concept of what's important, getting on base and hitting the ball out of the park, because then you don't have to worry about a shift or anything like that. So I'm definitely a person that likes, like, I like home runs to be sure, but I also like contact. I like movement, kineticism in the game of baseball. To reach for outcomes is just, quite frankly, way too static of a sport for me. So, I know, like, MLB brought in Theo Epstein as kind of like a special advisor to the commissioner's office type of thing. He's one of the guys that, when he was with the Cubs, was kind of pioneering this style of baseball. And I think he's kind of being tasked with, okay, how do we bring it back to being, a more fluid, in motion game that people can actually enjoy watching, as opposed to just watching the highlight reels of home runs and strikeouts and everything. So that is fascinating. Salutes and statements. I guess it's like a salute and statement. It's more of like a good riddance and statement of the week. Mark Emmert is set to step down as the NCAA president June 30th, 2023. And just good riddance to him. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the NCAA, period. Like, I like the product that they have. I dislike the disingenuity that they take toward that product.
The what?
The disingenuity.
Not genuine? What does that mean? Is that what
they're disingenuous about the product.
Okay, I got it.
About it, this
Cast
is all about
vocab.
the student athlete.
It's all about the money
for
you.
Which once upon a time, that was true. But then we have universities pouring how much money into getting athletic facilities and stadiums and all these things built, and how many billions of dollars are brought in for, NCAA tournament that we just got done watching earlier this month, and all the different bowl games and championships and what have you. I mean, certainly they've done well in some areas. They've done well. They've certainly done well in terms of making money, but we've also seen a wide rash of really horrendous things happening, off the playing surface, whether it's Baylor and Art Briles and the multiple, rape cases there. Of course, Sandusky and Penn State. I mean, I know Larry Nassar and Michigan State. There's so many different things that really cropped up underneath the NCAA's umbrella, and they really showed that the most they can do is, take back a Heisman Trophy if you were selling autographs or making money as an athlete. That's where the focus was with Mark Emmert as president. So a good riddance to him. Hopefully the NCAA can find some better direction in future years that's a little bit more aligned with not necessarily a straight up partnership, but realizing and recognizing more how important, the student athletes are to the overall NCAA product, making them a more equal member of the interaction that's going on. And hopefully somebody who has a little bit more backbone, a little bit sharper bite when it comes to these programs that do have really unfortunate things, really horrendous things happen underneath, and a little bit more backbone when it comes to stepping up and punishing them and saying that we're not going to tolerate this, regardless of what you as a school, as an institution, are going to be doing. So I know I'm getting far afield with it, but Mark Emmert, easily one of the least likable figures in sports. Good riddance to him after his long tenure as NCAA president.
Yeah, I gotta agree with pretty much all that you're saying. I would like to see what happens though, because I know it's very easy to scapegoat Mark Emmert. It's very easy to scapegoat any commissioner, but Mark Emmert himself is not the entire NCAA. There's obviously a lot other people who are involved in a lot of those things. A lot of school presidents, individual things are involved. So, like, how much better is it going to be post Mark Emmert? I do think that when they look at the new commissioner, they'll ideally look at some of the things you talked about. Hopefully they'll improve on them, but just how much better is it going to be? We'll see. Because, like, you can't scapegoat one person into all of the issues. Like, he's created a lot of them, but it's the institution as a whole, and we'll see if the next leader can step up and be better. I'm hoping that brings about massive change as opposed to, realistically, the little small progress we'll probably see.
Absolutely, yeah.
A couple quick salutes. These are ESPN headlines. Salute to you, Tom Castleman, and your boy, Drew Holiday, voted NBA Teammate of the Year. I just saw the NBA headlines. That's what it takes, man. Milwaukee Bucks. We're talking about role players, team chemistry. What did the Milwaukee Bucks do? The Milwaukee Bucks got Drew Holiday out there for a quick cameo at the end of the last game of the season to meet his quota for amount of games started, so he can get a little bit extra on his paycheck. Like, the Milwaukee Bucks are running a championship organization. That is a great place to be. The players are happy. They got their superstar back. despite being one of the smallest markets in the league, despite like not getting him quote unquote a legitimate number 2 superstar, didn't matter. They got Giannis back anyways. You know, they're getting teammate of the year. Like, what? Like, those guys are just doing it right. It's a salute to Drew Holiday, salute to Tom Castleman, and salute to the Milwaukee Bucks. This actually transitions really well into my statement, but I do have to get one other salute in before I do that. So I'll drop the good transition. I should have had this salute first. Salute to my boy, Roger Federer. First off, Roger Federer today is out there in Africa right now making a difference in the schools through the Roger Federer Foundation, which I happily donated to by getting my Roger Federer hat. So he does a lot of charity work in Africa for building schools and stuff. So salute to what he's doing, but salute to him coming back on the tennis court. My favorite athlete of all time is Leo Messi. And as much as I talk about Patrick Mahomes, Steph Curry, LeBron James on this show, those guys are actually my like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th favorite athletes. My number 2 favorite athlete is actually Roger Federer. Class guy on and off the court, a true champion. He's now, I believe, 40 years old. I don't realistically expect him to come back and win a major, but he's barely played any tennis literally since the pandemic happened. So looking forward to seeing him come back. He's going to play in his own tournament in Basel, Switzerland in October. He's made that announcement. Hopefully he plays some tennis before that. I would like to see him play in the Cincinnati Open in August, because I would definitely go to that myself to watch him play. I went to that tournament a few years back in the hopes of seeing him play the one pro tennis tournament I've been to. And he pulled out like day before the tournament. I had already had my tickets, so I did not get the chance to see him play. If he ever plays a tournament in Cincinnati again, I will definitely make the drive over to watch the great Roger Federer. As for my statement, I talked a lot about how the Bucks are doing things right. The Warriors, by the way, another franchise doing it right. Like, what are they doing? They're not tanking. They're making smart picks like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson. Like, yeah, they're lottery picks, but they're lower lottery picks. They don't need a top 5 pick. They can get Draymond Green in the 2nd round. They can get Jordan Poole later on in the draft and win. They're a motto organization. Who isn't a motto organization? That is the Brooklyn Nets. There is a lot of blame to be thrown around in Brooklyn. But I actually got to start with the management. And this is very similar to what we're seeing at PSG. Soccer reference for you. I know we had Neymar, Mbappe, and Messi, and they're like, how in the world did PSG get knocked out of the Champions League round of 16? Well, first off, they played Real Madrid. They got a bad draw. But secondly, talent alone does not win you championships. How you construct a roster is very important. Like the PSG example, like they got a lot of great attacking talent, but does it fit together? Because they all do similar things. Do they have enough defensive players to back up all those guys that are more concerned with offense? A lot of the same question marks with the Nets. Do they have enough defensive guys to help out on that team, which clearly they don't. But the roster construction from the start was really bad because you also got guys who aren't leaders. Like, you need to have guys who are willing to buy in, who don't have, not only is it a matter of egos, because Kevin Durant is willing to pass the ball. Kevin Durant, if anything, doesn't shoot the ball enough, but it's also having those leadership qualities to inspire your teammates and to not have those question marks off the court. Because Kyrie, KD, James Harden, all of those guys have question marks off the court. And what did they do? They brought in Steve Nash, and they brought in, didn't they bring in Mike D'Antoni to be an assistant?
I think so, yeah.
They brought in offensive coaches when clearly the team's weakness is defense, and they brought in only perimeter superstars. Like, what about the big man down low? I know you don't need like a 20 and 10 guy, but you got to have a big man. You got to have a bench. You got to have guys that fit together. And those guys weren't fitting together. I mean, it was basically like, who has the basketball? It's hard to get it in rhythm. And you need like a tough guy on the team. Like Kyrie Irving wasn't there for his team. He's not a tough guy. Like you bring in like Harden, Ben Simmons. I mean, all these guys that they're bringing in, they all have question marks in the leadership department. They don't have anyone on that team that's built to lead you. They have a lot of guys with big names, even like the bench players they're bringing in. Like they brought in LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin. Like those guys are past their prime. The Nets, literally their solution is let's throw money at the problem and let's throw a big name at the problem. They didn't care how the pieces fit together. They didn't care about the locker room, the leadership. They're like, oh, Steve Nash, big name. We'll get him as a head coach, even though he's never coached before in the NBA. We'll get him. Kevin Durant, big name. We'll get him. Kyrie Irving, big name. We'll get him. Oh, Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, they're past their primes, big names. We'll get him. We'll take them. Like Ben Simmons, James Harden, big name. Oh, they must be good. They're a big name. Like there was just no rhyme or reason as to how this team got constructed. I know, Tom, you talk about like, can the Nets be a legitimate championship contender next season? Quite frankly, I don't think so because Ben Simmons' contract is horrendous. I don't think Ben Simmons is going to be the same player he was. If you realistically believe that Ben Simmons is going to come back and be an all-star level player, quite frankly, you are delusional. Like that is factually accurate. Like they're going to pay all this money to Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and Ben Simmons. Who else are they going to get? Like who else are they going to get? And they're all perimeter players who execute better as ball movement players. As much as Steph Curry likes to handle the ball, Steph Curry loves coming off screens. Klay Thompson loves coming off screens. Jordan Poole loves coming off screens. What does Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, what do they like doing? They love ISO basketball. They are two of the best ISO players. Like they just don't fit well together. Like even like LeBron and Wade, they were willing passers. They could go to the hoop. They were very smart basketball players. You essentially have two ISO players, and then you're bringing in Ben Simmons, who is good when he can penetrate and dish. When is he going to penetrate? Like he's the number 3 guy on that team as far as big names. He's not going to knock down an open shot. Like what's the point of having him there on the court? Like I just don't get the roster construction, and just throwing together big names and expecting to win doesn't work. I do actually believe super teams can work if they're well constructed. When the Lakers originally got LeBron and Davis, they're constructed well together. They're the pick and pop duo that works well. You look at the Heat, LeBron and Wade have great chemistry. Those guys were going to work well together. Obviously, like Durant on the Warriors, it's almost like a little too unfair because Curry is willing to let Durant do his thing. That worked a little better. But there were some issues there, even in Golden State. And they did have Klay Thompson, who obviously the Nets didn't have. But I think super teams can work together if they're picked together correctly and if they're healthy. But the Nets super team is not constructed in the right way. Unless there's massive changes to the roster they have next year is not going to win a championship. And I think the Nets management is pretty bad.
I mean, they do have draft picks. They got those from Philly. They could use that to improve the team.
I don't know. Do you really trust them to make a good draft pick? I mean, the Nets are one of the losingest organizations.
They'll probably trade those draft picks for like an established player.
Yeah, they will. An established player past his prime that probably plays in the perimeter that's going to mess up the team chemistry. That's what they'll do.
Who would that be? Russell Westbrook?
Yep. Bring him on. Perfect. Let's reunite Westbrook and Durant. We saw how well Westbrook and Harden worked together and how well Durant and Harden worked together. Let's reunite the OKC guys together again. Why not? Why not?
Exactly.
You know, actually, they might bring in Chris Paul in 2 years when he's actually over the hill. I can see them doing that then. We'll see. So that him and Kyrie can split duty. I don't even know. I don't know. That'll do it, though, Tom. That's a good show, a long show again. We'll definitely be a little shorter next week. I say that, but we probably won't be.
We need Drew back to keep the reins tight on the timeline there.
I feel like Drew really reels us in. I probably talked more this week. I've been trying to let you guys talk more, and I felt like I actually listened back last week. Did a really good job of that. There was a lot of great things you had to say. I got too fired up today, but that's okay. That's a good problem to have. I got way too fired up about some of the topics today. Just the Nets, man. They got me. They got my heart boiling. And I'm not even a Nets fan. It just, as a fan of sports, just I don't like Durant and Kyrie as people. I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but I'm just not a fan of those two guys as people. I think they're great basketball players, but just not a fan of those guys off the court.
That's fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, that'll do it, Tom. We'll see you next week.
Sounds good. I'm going to go get some dinner.
I'm going to get some dinner as well. Have a good night, everyone.